Welcome back to the Quiet Apothecary. Settle in wherever you are, and let the day fall away from your shoulders a little at a time. There is nothing here that asks anything of you tonight, no test to pass and no clock to watch. Just a low light, a slow voice, and a long, gentle walk through a life that is not your own. Most nights we stand together on this side of the counter, opening drawers and jars, naming the plants that once made up the whole of medicine. Tonight is a little different. Tonight I am going to ask you to close your eyes, if they are not closed already, and step behind the counter yourself. Not as a visitor, as the healer. Picture it slowly, the way you might picture a room you have not seen in years. A small village, a few dozen households of stone and timber and thatch, scattered along a muddy lane and a slow brown river. Fields beyond the houses, a wood beyond the fields, and beyond the wood. More of the same, on and on, for a good many miles in every direction. No town near enough to matter. No infirmary, no college of physicians, no shop with a painted sign. Only you in a low cottage at the edge of the village, with a garden out the back and a shelf of jars by the fire, and the whole scattered parish counting on you to be awake when they knock. That is the life we are going to walk through tonight, slowly, the way such a life was actually lived, hour by hour and season by season, from the first knock before dawn to the last quiet visit after dark. Not the grim medieval you have perhaps been shown before, the mud and the misery and the plague carts. There is a little hardship in it, because there was hardship in every life then, but mostly there is patience and skill and a kind of quiet dignity in being the one person a whole village trusts with its aches and its fears. You will gather herbs from the hedge with your own 2 hands. You will sit up through a long birth. You will be paid more often than not in eggs and bread and a basket of apples, and you will find, I think, that this was not so small a wage as it sounds. So let your body settle a little further into the bed, or the chair, or wherever you are resting. Let your breathing slow to match my voice, and let us begin where every healer's day begins, not with the sun, but with a knock. You do not remember falling asleep, only waking, because that is how it always is when the knock comes before the sky has properly greyed. It is not a loud knock. Village people do not knock loudly on a healer's door, not because they are shy, but because some old courtesy tells them that whoever answers may have been up half the night already with someone else's trouble, and a gentle knock is kinder than a fist on old wood. You hear it once, twice, a pause, and then a third time, patient, the knock of someone who has walked a fair distance in the cold and intends to wait as long as it takes. You rise in the dark without a candle at first, because your feet know this floor better than your eyes do. The cottage is small, 1 main room below where you cook and work and receive whoever comes, a loft above where you sleep, a lean-to at the back that opens onto the garden. You find your outer clothes by feel, laid the night before across the same stool, because you have learned over the years that a healer who fumbles for clothes in the dark while someone waits outside in real distress is a healer who has not yet learned the shape of her own trade. You strike a light. You open the door. There is no guild behind you when you do this. No governing body has examined you. No fee has been paid to any hall in any city for the right to call yourself what the village already calls you. There is no shop sign swinging over your door, no window of jars arranged for passing trade, because there is no passing trade this far from anywhere. There is only you, and a reputation built slowly over years, one visit at a time, one recovery and one honest failure at a time, until the whole parish has quietly decided, without ever holding a vote on it, that you are the one they will wake before dawn when something is wrong. This is the first thing worth understanding about the life you have stepped into tonight. In the towns, in the cities far beyond the wood, there were guilds for physicians and guilds for barber surgeons and guilds for apothecaries, each with its own rules, its own oaths, its own long apprenticeships, and its own fees for the privilege of practicing openly. A university-trained physician there might spend years reading the old Greek and Arabic texts before he ever touched a patient, and even then he served mostly the wealthy, for his fees were high and his methods often stranger and more painful than the plain remedies a village healer kept on a low shelf. None of that reaches you out here. The nearest town with anything resembling a trained physician is a day's hard ride away, 2 days on foot, and the villagers you serve will never see that road unless something has gone very wrong indeed. For everything else, for the fevers and the fractures and the frightened new mothers and the failing old men, there is only you. You feel the weight of that most clearly in the quiet moment, just after opening the door, before you have even heard what is wrong. Whoever stands there, breath clouding in the cold, has already decided that you are the last and only line between their trouble and whatever comes if the trouble is left alone. There is no one to consult, no colleague down the lane to send for a second opinion, no way to say come back tomorrow when someone else is on duty. You are on duty every night of your life, because you are the only healer for miles, and that is simply the shape of the work you have taken on. And yet it would be wrong to imagine this as a grim burden carried alone in silence. It does not feel that way from the inside most nights. It feels, more often, like belonging so completely to a place that the place has stopped being able to imagine itself without you in it. You know every child's name and every child's tendency to fever. You know which old woman's joints ache worse before rain and which farmer's back gives out every year at haying time. You know who married whom, who buried whom, who is expecting a child this coming spring and has not yet told anyone but you. A physician passing through a great city sees 1,000 strangers and remembers none of them by supper. You see perhaps 200 souls, and you could draw a small map of every one of their sorrows from memory. So you step back from the door and let in whoever has come, and you listen, because listening is the very first medicine, and very often the largest part of it. Let us follow that knock inside, gently, and see what the day holds. There is no rush in any of this, and no danger either, not tonight. We are only visiting, you and I, a life that was lived slowly, in a village that no longer has a name that anyone remembers, a very long time ago. The knock tonight belongs to a young father, and the trouble is his daughter, perhaps 4 years old, burning with a fever that came on sudden in the small hours, and has not eased with anything he tried. You do not ask him to describe every detail standing in the cold doorway. You take your cloak from its peg, gather what you already know you will need into a woven basket by feel, because a good healer keeps that basket packed and ready every single night before sleeping. the way a soldier might keep his boots by the bed, and you walk with him back along the dark lane toward his cottage, listening to what he can tell you as you go. This walking itself is a part of the work that people rarely picture when they imagine an old-time healer. There is no carriage waiting, no messenger to send ahead. You walk, in whatever weather the night has brought, sometimes for a mile or more, sometimes twice that if the case lies at the far edge of the parish. And you walk quickly, but not so quickly that you arrive breathless and unable to think clearly. You learn, over years, to pace yourself for distance the way a good horse learns to pace itself for a long road, keeping something in reserve for whatever waits at the far end. You arrive to find the child restless in her small bed, cheeks flushed, the small chest working a little too hard, and the mother sitting beside her with the particular stillness of someone trying very hard not to show how frightened she is. You do not rush at the child either. You sit first and let your own calm settle into the room the way warmth settles into a cold hand held near a fire. You ask a few quiet questions. How long, since when? Has she taken anything? Has she vomited? Is there a rash? You lay the back of your hand against the small forehead, not because your hand is any kind of precise instrument, but because touch itself, gentle and unhurried, tells a mother that her child is now being cared for by someone who is not afraid. From your basket you take what the case calls for: a tea of elderflower and yarrow, gathered and dried yourself back in the warmer months, to bring the fever gently down and encourage a good, cleansing sweat rather than fighting the fever outright. For the old wisdom you have inherited holds that a fever run its careful course, watched closely, often does less harm than a fever fought too hard. You show the mother how to steep it, how much to give and how often, and you stay long enough to see the first small cup taken and kept down. You sponge the child's brow and wrists with cool water from the well, slow strokes, nothing sudden. You tell the father to keep the room a little cooler, the blankets a little lighter, and you promise, because this is the part of the work that costs nothing and matters enormously, that you will return before evening to see how she does. This is the shape of most calls, though the details shift endlessly. A fever in a child, a wrenched shoulder from a fall at the well, a stubborn cough that will not leave an old man's chest through a whole grey week, a cut that needs cleaning and binding before it can fester. None of it is dramatic in the way that later ages would imagine medieval life to be dramatic, all plague and horror. Mostly it is patient, careful, unhurried attention, paid by one steady person to whoever needs it, at whatever hour it is needed, for however long it takes. You walk home again as the sky finally begins to lighten, the basket a little emptier than it was, your own eyes heavy, knowing there will be no returning fully to sleep now that the village has begun to wake around you. This, too, is part of what it means to be the only healer for miles. Your day does not begin when you choose. It begins when the first knock comes, and it does not end until the last one has been answered. Whatever the hour, whatever the weather, whatever else you might have wished to be doing instead. Let us walk on together now slowly and see the rest of what such a day is made of. The cottage that waits for you at the end of that walk is not grand, and you have never wished it were. 2 rooms below, the loft above, walls of timber, and daub kept whitewashed with lime, so that even on a dull day, The inside holds a little brightness, a roof of thatch that your neighbors help renew every few years in exchange for a season of free tending to their small complaints. But it is what stands behind the cottage that truly makes your work possible. And that is the garden, and you step into it now in the grey early light, simply to see how everything has fared through the night. It is not large, perhaps the size of 2 good rooms laid end to end, enclosed by a low wattle fence to keep the hens and the goat from wandering in and eating the whole season's medicine in a single afternoon. It is laid out in beds, and though you did not learn the word for it from any book, what you have built here is very close to what later ages would call a Physic garden, a small ordered patch of ground given over entirely to plants grown for the body rather than the belly. Some beds hold what everyone would recognize from any cottage garden: the pot herbs, the sage and thyme and rosemary that flavor a stew as readily as they ease a chest. Others hold plants no one would think to plant for eating at all. The foxglove kept carefully at the garden's far edge because, as every careful healer must know, that its gift is also its danger, and a small mistake in measuring it could stop a heart rather than steady one. The comfrey grows thick and unkillable along the north wall, its broad leaves ready at a moment's notice for a poultice on a sprain or a break. The lavender edges the path, planted as much for the calm its scent brings to a frightened visitor as for its many small uses in salves and sleep pillows. You walk the rows slowly, checking what wants harvesting today and what still wants another week of sun. This morning inspection is not idle. It is how you keep the shelf inside stocked without ever letting anything go to waste. Picking each plant at its truest hour, the leaves before the flowering when their strength is most concentrated, the flowers themselves at the very peak of their brief opening, the roots only in autumn, when the plant has drawn its strength back down into the earth for winter. No book taught you most of this. It was taught to you, patiently, hand over hand, season after season, by whoever taught you this trade before you, most likely an aunt or a grandmother, or, if you were fortunate, the healer who held this same cottage before you and chose you, young and curious and steady-handed, to carry the work forward. Behind the garden stands the small lean-to that serves as your still room, though still room is a grander name than the place deserves. It is where the real transformation happens, where raw plant becomes usable medicine. Bunches of herbs hang from the low beams, drying slowly in the shade, for direct sun would rob them of half their virtue before you ever had the chance to use it. A stone mortar and a heavy wooden pestle sit on a scarred worktable, stained dark in places from years of crushing roots and seeds and berries. Clay jars line a shelf along one wall, each one holding a dried herb, a prepared salve, an infused oil, each one labeled not in careful script, for you have little cause to read or write beyond what the parish priest has taught you of your letters. But in a private system of small marks, and the placement of the jars themselves, a memory palace built of clay and cork that only you can read at a glance. Here you make the decoctions, the long, slow simmering of roots and bark in water over a low fire until the water itself becomes medicine, thickened and darkened, and carrying within it whatever virtue the plant possessed. Here you make the infusions, the gentler steeping of leaves and flowers in hot water, the simplest of all your preparations, and often the kindest, The sort of remedy you can teach any mother to make herself once you have told her which plant and how much. Here you render the salves, beeswax and rendered fat melted together with herbs, steeped slowly within them, poured into small clay pots to cool and set, ready to be rubbed into an aching joint or a healing wound. And here, on the highest shelf, out of easy reach, sit the tinctures, herbs steeped for weeks in whatever strong spirit the village can spare, a slow extraction that draws out virtues no simple water infusion ever could, kept for the more serious cases where a gentler remedy has already been tried and found wanting. None of this equipment came from any shop, because there was no shop within reach to buy it from. The mortar was carved by the village wood turner in payment for tending his gout through 3 long winters. The clay jars came from a pot or 2 villages over, traded a dozen at a time for a season's worth of salve for his wife's aching hands. Even the knowledge itself, the ordering of which plant does what, and how much is medicine and how much is poison, came to you the same way everything in this life comes to you, slowly, through relationship. Through years of watching and doing, and occasionally getting it wrong, in some small forgivable way, and learning from the getting wrong. You gather this morning's harvest into your apron, a handful of chamomile flowers at their peak, a good bundle of nettle for its iron-rich strength, and carry it inside to begin the day's drying and sorting even as the rest of the household begins to stir. There is a rhythm to this work that never quite stops. The garden feeding the still room feeding the shelf feeding whoever knocks next upon your door. On and on, season folding into season, the whole quiet machine of it turning steadily beneath the surface of every visit you make. But the garden alone, however carefully tended, could never hold everything a healer needs. And this is where the wider world beyond your low wattle fence becomes part of your daily work as well. Beyond the garden's edge lies the hedge, the wild green border between the cultivated fields and the deeper wood, and it is here, more than anywhere else, that the old craft of village healing shows its truest face. Let us walk out there together now, unhurried, and see what the hedge has to offer a healer who has learned, over years of patient looking, to read it properly. You go out most days when the weather allows, basket on your arm, moving slowly along the hedgerow that separates one farmer's field from another, and to a stranger's eye you might seem simply to be wandering, admiring the wildflowers the way anyone might on a fine morning. But your eyes are doing careful work as you walk. There, low against the base of the hedge, the dandelion, so common that no one thinks to call it medicine, and yet its bitter leaves cleanse the blood and ease a sluggish liver. Its root roasted and ground stands in for coffee for those too poor to buy the real thing. Its whole plant edible from root to flower and useful at every part. There, climbing through the brambles, the honeysuckle, its flowers steeped for a soothing tea for a sore throat. There, in the damp ditch beside the lane, the comfrey growing wild as it grows tame in your garden, and further along, where the hedge thins near the wood's edge, the elder tree, perhaps the single most valuable plant in your entire craft, its flowers for fever in the spring, its berries for the coughs and chills of winter, its very presence near a cottage said by the old folk to keep away misfortune, though you have learned to hold such old sayings lightly, respecting them without depending on them. Deeper into the wood, Where you go less often and always with care, grow the plants that ask more caution, the mandrake root that the old stories wrap in warnings and strange rituals, the belladonna with its dark, tempting berries that have ended more than one careless child's life, the plants you know by their danger, as much as by their occasional narrow use in the smallest, most carefully measured doses. Part of your craft, and no small part of it, is knowing exactly which of these to gather and which to leave entirely alone, a knowledge that took years to build and that you guard as carefully as any locked chest, for a poison in careless hands is no different from a curse. You gather what today's baskets in the sick room will need: more nettle for the ironite, lens to a woman weak after a hard birth, a good stock of yarrow against the next fever, willow bark stripped carefully from a young branch and set aside to dry, for its bitter virtue eases pain and brings down a fever both. The same quiet gift that later ages would isolate and refine and give a different, more familiar name. You know, without ever having read a Latin text on the matter, that different parts of the same plant hold different strengths, that timing matters as much as identification, that the hedge in spring offers different medicine than the hedge in autumn, and that a healer who does not walk this border regularly, season after season, will simply not have what the village needs when the village needs it. This is the quiet foundation beneath everything else in your work. No merchant delivers herbs to your door. No apothecary shop in some distant city ships you dried goods by the crate. Everything you use, you either grow with your own hands in the small garden behind your cottage, or you gather with your own hands from the hedge and the wood that border the village, walking the same paths season after season until you could probably find every plant blindfolded, guided only by scent and the shape of leaves beneath your fingers. It is slow work and patient work, and it asks a kind of attentiveness to the turning of the year that most people, then or now, rarely have cause to develop. But it is also, in its own quiet way, a kind of wealth, for you never lack for what your neighbors need, and the whole green world around the village stands ready, season after season, to refill whatever you have used. There is one kind of call that comes differently from all the others, and it comes now, this afternoon, as you are still sorting the morning's harvest onto the drying racks. It is a girl of perhaps 12, breathless, sent running from a farmhouse at the far side of the village, and she does not need to say much before you understand. Her aunt's time has come, earlier than expected, and the labor is not going easily. You set down what is in your hands at once, for a birth, more than almost any other kind of call, does not wait. You are, in this village, the midwife as much as you are the healer, and in truth the two roles were never really separate to begin with, not out here, where there is no one else to divide the work between. In the towns, sometimes, a woman might train as a midwife alone, attending births and nothing else, her whole craft narrowed to that single, vital skill. Here, you are expected to be everything at once, and birth is simply one more chapter in a trade that asks you to know a little of everything the body can do, joyful and difficult both. You gather what such a night will need. Clean linen, boiled beforehand and kept ready, for you have learned, through years of hard experience, and through half-remembered wisdom passed down from whoever taught you, that cleanliness at a birth matters more than almost anything else you might do. though you could not have explained precisely why in the language later ages would use. Raspberry leaf, dried and ready to steep into a tea that eases and strengthens the laboring womb. A small vial of oil, warmed before use, to ease the strain upon the body as the birth nears its hardest hour. And beyond all of this, you gather your own calm, because a frightened healer at a birth makes for a frightened mother, and a frightened mother's body works against itself. The walk to the farmhouse is quick, faster than this morning's, because urgency moves the feet differently than routine does, though you keep your breathing even so, arriving steady rather than winded. Inside, the household is already in the particular hush that surrounds a difficult labor, the husband banished to the yard or the barn as custom demands, a sister or a neighbor woman already present, doing what she can, which mostly means holding a hand and keeping a fire fed and waiting for you. You take in the room at a glance the way years of practice have taught you to. The mother's color, her breathing, the rhythm and strength of the pains, and you settle in beside her, low-voiced, unhurried, because the very first thing a laboring woman needs from you is the sense that you have seen this before and are not afraid. You have seen this before dozens of times by now, though every birth still carries its own private mystery, its own unrepeatable combination of difficulty and grace. The hours that follow are long, and they ask a particular kind of endurance from you that the daylight calls rarely demand. You do not simply arrive, do a task, and leave. You stay through the whole slow unfolding of it, present for every pain and every brief rest between them, watching for the small signs that tell you whether things are progressing as they should or beginning to go wrong. You press a warmed cloth against an aching back. You offer sips of the raspberry leaf tea between the hardest pains. You speak steadily, telling her when the sounds she hears from her own body are ordinary and expected, because fear itself can slow a labor, and a calm word is sometimes the most potent medicine you carry. There are moments in the deep of such a night when the work grows harder, and your own knowledge is tested more sharply than any daylight fever ever tests it. Perhaps the child turns awkwardly, and you must use your hands, carefully, patiently, to help guide what the body alone cannot quite manage. Perhaps the labor simply runs long, hour after hour, and your own tiredness has to be set firmly aside, because the mother's need has not lessened simply, because the night has grown late. You have learned, over years, to find a second kind of waking within yourself for exactly these nights, a steadiness that does not depend on how many hours of sleep you have had, because the work in front of you does not care how tired you are. And then, at whatever hour it finally comes, there is the child, small and slick and furious at the sudden cold of the world, and the sound that fills the room is the sound that makes every hard hour before it worth having lived through. You do the last careful work, seeing to the cord, checking the small new body over for anything amiss, wrapping the infant warm and placing it, still crying, against its mother's chest, where the crying, more often than not, quiets almost at once. You do not leave immediately even now. You stay to see the afterbirth safely delivered, to check that the bleeding settles as it should, to press a warm compress where it is needed, and to leave behind a tea that will help the womb draw back down over the coming days. You give the same instructions you have given at every birth you have attended, quiet, Practical, unhurried, rest as much as you are able, eat well if the household can manage it, send for me again if the bleeding does not slow or the fever rises. And do not be afraid to send for me, even in the smallest hours, for this is exactly the kind of trouble that cannot wait for a more convenient time. Only then, as the first grey of a second dawn begins at the window, do you finally step back out into the cold morning air, the household behind you settling into the particular exhausted joy of a birth safely finished. You walk home slowly this time, your body heavy with the night's work, but there is a satisfaction in this particular tiredness that the ordinary run of fevers and small complaints rarely gives you in quite the same measure. You have helped bring a new life safely into a hard world, with nothing but your own 2 hands, your own gathered knowledge, and whatever the hedge and garden have provided you across the turning seasons. It is, perhaps, the truest measure of what it means to be the only healer for miles, that on the hardest nights you are asked to be everything at once, and somehow, most of the time, you manage to be enough. Not every call you answer is quite so purely medical as a fever or a birth, and it would be a mistake to imagine your work as though it existed apart from everything the village believes about the world beyond what can be seen and touched. The people who knock on your door at midnight do not always separate the illness of the body from the fear of something less easily named, and a healer who cannot sit gently with both will find her craft only half complete. Let us walk together now into one of these quieter, stranger corners of the work. An old woman comes to you one grey afternoon, not for herself, but on behalf of a young mother 2 cottages down, whose infant will not settle, cries through most of the night, and seems, to the frightened family, to be wasting rather than thriving. The old woman does not say the word outright at first, but you know from long practice what she is circling toward, and eventually it comes out, low and half embarrassed even as she says it. She fears the child has been overlooked, marked by an envious glance from a neighbor whose own child did not survive the past winter. The evil eye, some call it, though the name shifts from village to village, and the fear beneath it is older than any name given to it. You do not laugh at this, and you do not scold the old woman for bringing it to you rather than straight to reason. You have learned, over years in this work, that fear left unaddressed does its own kind of harm, sometimes as much harm as any fever, and that a healer who only ever offers herbs while dismissing what truly frightens a household has not actually finished the work of healing. So you go, and you examine the infant carefully, the way you would examine any fretful child, checking for fever, for colic, for the small ordinary troubles that make babies cry through the night far more often than any curse does. Very often, and it is very often indeed, you find something plain and treatable, a gripe eased by a little fennel water, a colic settled by a warmer swaddling, and a change in how the mother is nursing. And the practical remedy alone, given with warmth and confidence, does most of the true work. But you do not stop there, because stopping there would leave the family's deeper fear entirely unaddressed. And an unaddressed fear in a small, close village has its own way of curdling into something worse. Suspicion between neighbors, a coldness that lingers long after the original worry has passed. So alongside the fennel water, you also do what the village expects and half needs from you, a small blessed sprig of rowan, hung above the cradle, a quiet murmured charm you learned long ago from whoever taught you this work before you. A few words that mean, more than anything, I have taken this seriously, and I am not afraid of it, and neither should you be. You have thought carefully, over the years, about your own relationship to these old beliefs, and you have settled somewhere that serves the village better than either extreme would. You do not believe, in your own quiet heart, that a jealous glance can truly wither a child, not the way you believe that a fever can be brought down by yarrow, or a wound cleaned by honey and closed with a careful stitch. But you have also learned that certainty is not always the kindest gift a healer can give, and that a frightened mother who leaves your cottage reassured, her baby's colic eased, and a small rowan charm hung above the cradle for good measure, sleeps better and cares for her infant more steadily than a mother sent away with nothing but a dismissive word about superstition. The charm costs you nothing, and the fennel water does the true work, and if both together leave the household calmer, you have done your job well, whatever the precise mechanism of the calming. This is a delicate balance, and not every healer strikes it wisely. You have heard of others in this same craft, in villages beyond your own, who lean too hard one way or the other, either dismissing every fear as foolishness and losing the trust of the very people who need calming most, or leaning so far into charm and omen that the plain, provable medicine gets crowded out entirely, and a child suffers because a curable fever was treated only with ritual and no yarrow tea at all. You have found, through years of careful watching, that the wisest path holds both hands at once, the herb and the charm, the practical and the comforting, offered together with the same steady confidence, so that whichever part of a frightened family's mind needs soothing, something in your visit soothes it. There is a particular kind of trust that grows from handling these moments well, a trust that runs deeper than gratitude for a fever brought down or a wound properly closed. It is the trust of a whole community that believes you take their fears seriously, whatever those fears may be, and that you will not mock them for believing in things that cannot be seen. That trust, more than any single cure, is what makes you truly welcome at every door in the parish, and it did not come quickly. It came the same way everything in this work comes, slowly, visit by visit, over years. It is worth pausing here, in this quiet stretch of the afternoon, while the bread rises on the hearth and no one is currently knocking, to think back on how that trust was first built, because it did not arrive with you the day you took up this cottage. You remember, if you let yourself remember, how uncertain those early years felt. No parchment hung anywhere declaring you fit to practice. No examining body had tested your knowledge of the humors or the properties of 100 plants and pronounced you competent. In the towns, a physician might carry such a document, sealed and signed. Proof enough for anyone who asked. You carried nothing but what you knew, and a willingness to be tested again and again by the only examiners that mattered here, the villagers themselves. The first years were the hardest, though not in the way you might expect. It was not that people doubted your knowledge outright, for word travels in a small place, and everyone knew you had trained under the healer who came before you, watching and learning at her side for years before she grew too old to walk the lanes herself and pass the work to you. but knowing that you had trained is different from trusting you completely. And there is a particular test that every new healer must pass, whether anyone names it as a test or not. You must be present, reliably, for the small things, long before anyone will trust you with the large ones. So you tended the small things faithfully. A splinter drawn carefully from a child's foot, a headache eased with feverfew, a minor burn from the kitchen fire, treated promptly with honey and a clean dressing, healing cleanly and without infection, because you had learned, as your teacher had learned before you. That honey holds a quiet power against corruption that the plainest common sense of generations had discovered long before anyone could explain why. Each of these small successes, individually, meant little. Together, accumulated over a season, and then a year, and then several years, they built something that no parchment ever could, a settled, unspoken confidence among your neighbors that when trouble came, you would know what to do, and that you would come when called, and that you would not make things worse through carelessness or absence. There was, too, a harder kind of trust to earn, the trust that comes only from being present at the failures as well as the successes. Not every fever breaks. Not every birth ends with a healthy cry filling the room. You remember, though you do not dwell on it in the daylight hours, if you can help it, the losses from your early years. A child whose fever would not yield to anything you tried. An old man whose heart simply gave out, despite every remedy you knew. A birth that went badly despite your best and most careful attention. A healer who has never lost a patient has usually not been doing this work very long, and the village knows this too, in its quiet, practical way. What matters, what truly builds trust, is not a perfect record, which no honest healer could claim, but an honest one, and a healer who stays present through the hardest losses rather than fleeing from them, who sits with a grieving family rather than making excuses and leaving quickly, earns something that no unbroken record of success ever could. You think, too, of how differently trust is built here than it would be in a city, where a physician's reputation might rest on his university, his teacher's fame, the grand houses he is known to visit. Here, reputation is built entirely from the ground, one visit at a time, one honest word at a time, and it can be lost far more quickly than it can be earned. A single act of carelessness, a promise not kept, a visit not made when it was truly needed, and years of careful trust can crack. You have seen it happen to others in this work, in villages not far from your own, a healer who grew careless, or proud, or too quick to turn away a call that seemed inconvenient, and the whole patient structure of trust that had taken a decade to build came down within a season. The villagers turning instead to whatever charm woman or herb wife remained, or worse, to no one at all, suffering silently rather than trusting a healer who had shown herself unreliable. So you have learned, over the years, to guard this trust the way you guard your rarest and most dangerous herbs, carefully, deliberately, never taking it for granted. You answer every knock, whatever the hour, because the one night you do not answer may be the night that undoes years of faithful answering. You admit, plainly and without excuse, when a case is beyond what you know, sending word to the town when a physician's more specialized skill is truly needed rather than pretending a confidence you do not feel, because honesty about your limits is itself a kind of trustworthiness. You keep confidences, too, The small private troubles a household shares with you in a moment of fear, because a healer who gossips about what she learns in a sick room soon finds sick rooms closing quietly against her. And slowly, over years, this careful, patient tending of trust becomes its own kind of reward, quite apart from whatever payment changes hands. You walk through the village now, years into this work, and you are greeted differently than a stranger would be greeted, differently even than most of the villagers greet one another. Children wave without fear, because you are the one who eased their splinters and their fevers, rather than the frightening figure some might imagine a healer to be. Old men nod with a particular respect, the respect owed to someone who has sat with them through their worst nights and their family's worst nights, and who will very likely sit with them again before the end. You have become, without ever seeking the position formally, something closer to family than to a tradesperson, a fixture of the village as permanent and as trusted as the church or the mill, earned entirely without any seal or certificate, built one honest visit at a time. Not every case that comes to your door resolves as gently as a fever brought down with yarrow tea, or a splinter drawn from a small foot. Some tests your knowledge and your nerve far more severely, and it is worth walking through one such case honestly, because it shows most clearly what this work truly demands when the stakes are highest and the tools available to you are, by any later measure, remarkably plain. A young man, one of the strongest hands on the largest farm in the parish, comes to you carried rather than walking, borne on a makeshift litter by two of his fellow labourers, his leg broken badly beneath a fallen cart wheel in the fields that afternoon. There is no surgeon within reach, no hospital with instruments and trained hands, no possibility of the kind of care a similar injury might receive in a great city's infirmary. There is only you, your cottage, your small store of tools and herbs, and whatever skill years of this work have taught you. You do not panic, though the injury is serious enough to warrant panic in someone less practiced. You have learned, through the same slow accumulation of experience that built everything else in this trade, that your own calm is often the single most important tool you carry into a hard case, because a frightened patient's body works against its own healing, tense and struggling, while a patient who trusts the hands working on him relaxes enough for those hands to do their work properly. So you speak low and steady as you examine the leg, telling him plainly what you see, a clean break rather than a shattered one, which is, you tell him honestly, better fortune than it might have been. Setting a broken bone with nothing but your own hands and a stranger's tools has been taught to you, the same way everything else has, through watching, through practice on lesser injuries, through the accumulated wisdom of healers, before you passed carefully down. You have him bite down on a folded cloth, for there is no gentler way through this particular moment. And with the two labourers holding him steady, you draw the leg straight with firm, careful pressure, feeling for the moment the bone ends meet properly, rather than grinding awkwardly past one another. It is over quickly, though the sound he makes and the sweat that breaks across his brow tell you plainly how much the moment cost him. Then comes the slower, more patient work. You splint the leg with straight lengths of wood padded carefully with wool, bound firmly, but not so tight as to stop the blood's flow, for you have seen, in cases before this one, What happens when a splint is bound too eagerly and the limb beneath it sickens rather than heals? You dose him with willow bark tea for the pain and for the fever that so often follows a serious injury. And you clean the torn skin around the break carefully with well-boiled water and a wash of honey, guarding as fiercely as you can against the deep infection that, more than the break itself, is what truly threatens a limb and sometimes a life in a case like this. You do not simply treat him once and leave him to fate. You return the next day, and the day after that, and every few days across the following weeks, checking the splint, checking for the warmth and swelling that would signal trouble brewing beneath the wrapping, adjusting what needs adjusting, renewing the honey dressing, watching with a patience that never quite relaxes until the danger of infection has clearly passed. This ongoing watchfulness, more than any single dramatic act at the moment of injury, is what truly determines whether such a case ends in a man walking again or a man losing a limb or worse. And you know this well enough to make the long weeks of careful checking a non-negotiable part of your care. However, many other calls compete for your time in the same stretch of weeks. There is no guarantee in any of this, and you know it plainly even as you work. Without the tools a later age would consider basic, without any true understanding of the smallest causes of infection, you are working with patience and cleanliness and careful watching as your only true weapons against the deeper dangers such an injury carries. Some cases like this, despite everything you know and everything you do, end badly, and you have seen it happen to your own great grief more than once across your years in this work. But many, most in fact, end well. The patient young man walking again by the following summer with only a slight unevenness in his gait to show for the accident, and it is this quiet, unglamorous persistence, this willingness to keep returning, to keep watching, to keep adjusting week after week, that makes the true difference between the cases that heal and the cases that do not. He walks again in the end, this particular young man, and though the leg never sits quite as straight as it did before the accident, it carries him through decades more of work in the same field. And every time you pass him at market or at church, he greets you with a warmth that no fee could ever properly repay. This is, perhaps, the deepest satisfaction this hard work offers. Not the dramatic moment of setting the bone, though that moment asked everything of your nerve, but the long, quiet, unglamorous weeks of returning and watching and adjusting that followed it, the part of the work that no one but you and the patient ever truly sees. Let us turn now to a gentler part of this life, the part that touches every single visit you make, whether the case is small or serious, and that is the matter of payment, for you must eat and clothe yourself and keep your own household running just as anyone else must. And the way this village settles its debts to you tells its own quiet story about the shape of the world you live in. There is no fixed fee for your visits, no schedule of charges the way a town physician might keep. So much for a consultation, so much more for a procedure. Coin itself is scarce in a village this far from any market town, passed carefully from hand to hand and hoarded against the rare occasions when it is truly needed, a debt to the manor, a tax to the crown, a purchase from a traveling trader passing through once or twice a year. For the daily business of living, the village runs largely on a different kind of currency altogether, the currency of goods and labor exchanged directly, one household's surplus meeting another household's need, and you are woven into this economy as thoroughly as the miller, or the blacksmith, or the priest. So, when you finally step back from the young father's cottage, after the fever has broken, and the small girl is sitting up asking for her supper, what follows in the days after is not a coin pressed into your palm, but a basket left quietly at your door, half a dozen eggs still warm from the nest, wrapped carefully in a cloth. When the farmer, whose leg you set, finally walks again, what comes to you across the following seasons is not a lump sum, but an ongoing, unspoken understanding. A portion of his harvest set aside for your household each autumn, a day of his labor offered freely whenever your own roof or fence needs mending. For he cannot easily match what you did for him with money he does not have, and so he matches it instead with what he does have, which is strength and time, and the produce of his own land. You have learned, over years in this work, not to measure this kind of payment against what a town physician might charge, for the comparison misleads more than it clarifies. A dozen eggs from a household that has little to spare represents, in its own way, a more genuine sacrifice than a coin from a household that has plenty. And you have come to understand your own worth in this village, not by counting what changes hands, but by noticing how readily it is offered. A poor household that brings you what little it has, apologizing for the smallness of the gift, honors you every bit as much as a wealthier household that can afford to send something grander. And you have learned never to let your face show disappointment at a thin offering, for the thinness of the gift is very often matched by the thinness of everything else in that household's stores, and the true payment in such cases is the gratitude behind the gift rather than the gift's own modest weight. There is a particular rhythm to how this payment arrives across a full year, and it is worth understanding because it shapes your own household's fortunes as surely as any wage would. In the lean months of late winter and early spring, when the stores from last autumn's harvest have thinned and every household is counting carefully what remains, payment for your work often arrives slim and delayed, a promise more than a delivery, an understanding that the debt is remembered and will be settled once the year turns kenda. You accept this without resentment, because you understand the village's rhythms as intimately as your own, and because you know, from years of watching the same cycle turn, that the debt will indeed be settled later, when harvest brings abundance back to every table, including your own. Then comes the richer season, the months around harvest, when the fields give up their bounty, and every household finds itself, briefly, with more than the bare minimum needed to survive the coming winter. This is when the accumulated debts of a full year tend to settle all at once, baskets and sacks and small gifts arriving at your door in a steady procession. A bushel of apples from the orchard you tended a fevered child through in spring, a good wheel of cheese from the dairy where you delivered twins the previous autumn, a length of good wool cloth from the family whose grandmother you sat with through her final gentle weeks, your own cellar and storeroom, thin through the winter and spring, filled again through these autumn weeks, not because any single household has paid you generously, but because the whole village together quietly ensures that its healer does not go without, beyond the household who has directly received your care. There is a wider, gentler current of support that flows toward you simply because of what you are to this village. The miller sets aside a little extra flour when the milling is done, delivered without any particular occasion attached to it, simply because a healer's household should not want for bread. A neighboring farmer, whose own family you have tended only lightly across the years, still leaves a portion of vegetables at your gate through the growing season, because you are understood by common unspoken agreement to be a household the whole village supports, not merely the households you have individually served. This is, perhaps, the truest measure of your place here, that your welfare has become, in some quiet way, a shared concern of the entire parish, the way a well or a bridge might be a shared concern, something everyone benefits from, and so everyone helps maintain. It would be dishonest to pretend this arrangement leaves you wealthy by any measure a town dweller would recognize. Your household eats well enough most years and rarely goes truly hungry, even in the leanest stretches, but you own little beyond your cottage and its garden and your carefully gathered stores of herbs and tools. No fine furnishings, no store of coin beyond a small careful reserve kept against true emergency. And yet you have come to understand, across years of living this way, that the wealth this life offers is simply measured differently than coin measures wealth. You want for very little that truly matters. Your table, more often than not, holds good food freely given rather than dearly bought. Your roof is mended by hands that owe you a debt of gratitude rather than by hands you must pay from an empty purse. And beyond the material provision, there is something harder to name, but every bit as real, the deep, settled sense of being valued by every household in a place, of never truly being a stranger anywhere within its bounds, because everyone, in some fashion, owes you something, and everyone, in the same quiet fashion, is glad to owe it. Not every household you serve stands equal in the eyes of the wider world, and it would tell only half the story of your work to speak only of the village's poorer cottages and farms. There is a manor at the edge of the parish too, home to the Lord, whose lands these fields technically belong to. And your standing there is worth understanding, for it shows something important about the strange, leveling nature of illness, which asks nothing of rank when it arrives, and receives, from your hands, exactly the same careful attention whichever door you happen to be standing behind. The manor house is grander than anything else within a day's walk, stone rather than timber, with glass in some of its windows, where the village cottages make do with shutters and the occasional scrap of oiled cloth. When word comes from the manor that you are wanted, it often arrives differently than a village knock, a servant sent formally, rather than a frightened parent running barefoot through the mud. Sometimes even a small sum of actual coin offered rather than the eggs and bread and labor that settle your debts with the rest of the parish. And yet, once you are inside and standing beside whatever bed holds the trouble, you find again and again that illness makes remarkably little distinction between a lord's chamber and a peasant's loft. A fever burns the same in a body wrapped in fine linen as it does in a body wrapped in rough wool. A birth strains the same whether the mother labors on a carved bed or a straw pallet. The remedies you reach for shift only slightly, perhaps a costlier spice added, where the manor stores allow it, and a poorer households do not. But the underlying craft, The careful watching, the patient tending remains entirely the same. There is, admittedly, a different kind of caution required at the manor that the village rarely demands of you. The lord and his household have, on occasion, sent to the distant town for a proper physician when a case seems serious enough to warrant the expense and the delay, and you understand this without resentment, for it is simply the way rank works in this world. The wealthy reaching for whatever resource seems grandest, even when the humbler resource close at hand might serve every bit as well. You have learned to hold your own confidence steadily in these moments, offering your honest assessment plainly, neither inflating your own importance to seem grander than a village healer ought, nor shrinking so far into deference that you fail to speak plainly when plain speaking is exactly what the case requires. You have found, across the years, a particular value in serving both ends of this village's world, for each teaches you something the other cannot. The manor's occasional visitor, a traveling relation or a passing cleric, sometimes carries news or even small scraps of learning from the wider world, a mention of some remedy used in the town's proper apothecary shops, a rumor of some new understanding drifting slowly outward from the universities, and you listen carefully to whatever such visitors let slip, weighing it against your own accumulated craft, sometimes finding a genuinely useful new idea folded within the gossip. The village, meanwhile, keeps you grounded in the older, deeper wisdom. The plain remedies proven true across generations of Cottage, used long before any university considered them worth studying. You carry both worlds within your single trade. The manor's occasional glimpse of grander learning and the village's deep well of inherited, practical knowledge, and you have come to believe, quietly, that this dual vantage makes you a better healer than you would be if you served only one world or the other. The year does not sit still around you while all of this unfolds, and no season shapes your work quite as decisively as autumn does, for autumn is when the whole slow labor of the warmer months finally gathers itself into the stores that will carry your craft and your village through the long dark months ahead. Let us slow down here for a while and walk through what this gathering season truly asks of you. You begin watching for it long before the first leaf turns, learning across years to read the small signals the plants themselves give when their strength is at its fullest and their season of usefulness draws toward its close. The roots want digging once the plant above ground has begun to fade, and the strength has drawn back down into the earth. For a root pulled too early carries only a fraction of the virtue it will hold once autumn has done its slow work. You spend whole mornings on your knees in the garden and along the hedgerow, a digging fork in hand, working the earth carefully around comfrey and dandelion and burdock, lifting the roots whole rather than snapping them, for a broken root left partly in the ground wastes half of what you came for and disturbs the plant's chance to return next season. The berries ripen through these same weeks, and you gather them with a particular urgency, for birds and small creatures compete for them as eagerly as you do, and a week's delay can mean an empty branch where a full one waited before. The elderberries hang heavy and dark by early autumn, and you spend whole afternoons stripping them carefully from their stems into wide baskets, your fingers stained deep purple by the day's end, knowing that what you gather now will be the single most reliable defense your whole village as against the coughs and chills that winter will inevitably bring. You dry some whole, you press others for a thick, dark syrup sweetened with whatever honey you can spare, and you store both carefully, for by midwinter this modest harvest will be worth more to a shivering household than almost anything else on your shelf. The seeds, too, want gathering now, before the frost takes them or the wind scatters them beyond finding, and you move through the garden with small cloth bags, collecting fennel and caraway, and the last of the season's chamomile flowers, laying each on its own drying rack in the still room, for a seed gathered too wet will mold before it ever proves useful, and a season's careful growing wasted through careless drying is a loss you have learned, through hard early lessons, never to repeat. This is also the season when you take stock properly of everything the year has given you, walking your shelves and jars with the same slow attentiveness you bring to walking the hedge, noting what stands full and what runs thin, planning ahead for the months when the garden itself will offer nothing at all, and the hedge will stand bare and sleeping under frost. You have learned, through hard winters in years past, when your planning fell short, that autumn's abundance is deceptive, easy to take for granted precisely because it arrives in such generous quantity, and that a healer who does not use this season wisely will find herself, come the deep cold months, with empty jars and a village still full of need. There is help in this work, too, though it rarely announces itself as such. The village's own rhythm of harvest brings extra hands your way without anyone quite arranging it formally. Children sent to help an old healer gather what she needs in exchange for a sweet given from your own stores. A neighbor woman who enjoys the walk to the hedge and brings back a full basket simply because she was passing that way regardless. You have learned to accept this help gladly and to teach as you accept it, showing a curious child which leaf belongs to which plant, which berry is safe and which is not, planting, without quite meaning to, the same seeds of knowledge that someone once planted in you, seeds that may, one distant day, grow into the next healer this village needs. By the time the first hard frost finally arrives, your still room stands transformed from its summer self, every shelf and beam crowded with the gathered wealth of the whole growing year, bundles of dried herbs hanging in neat, dusty rows, jars of syrup and salve and tincture lined carefully by kind and by use, roots stored in sand-filled boxes to keep them firm through the coming months. It is, in its own quiet way, as satisfying a harvest as any farmer's grain store, though it will never be counted or taxed the way a farmer's grain is counted and taxed, and you allow yourself, on the evening the last of the gathering is finally done, a rare unhurried hour, simply sitting among the fruits of the whole year's patient labor, the fire low, the shutters closed against the first true cold of the coming season, knowing that whatever winter brings, you will not face it unprepared. And winter does come, as it always does, settling over the village in the particular way that a hard northern winter settles, the fields gone silent under frost, the days shrinking to a few pale hours of light, the whole rhythm of the parish drawing inward toward hearth and hall. This is, in its own way, the season that tests your craft most thoroughly, not through any single dramatic case, but through the sheer, steady weight of need that a long, cold, close season brings to every door in the village, your own included. The coughs begin early, as they always do, the first cold snaps drawing tight, wheezing breath from the very old and the very young, the households least able to withstand a hard winter's particular dangers. You find yourself walking the same frozen lanes again and again through these dark months, your breath clouding ahead of you, your basket now carrying different stores than it carried through the warmer seasons, less of the cooling herbs that eased summer's fevers, more of the warming remedies that ease a chest grown tight and a body grown chilled through. There is an old man at the edge of the village, a widower living alone in a cottage his children have long since left, whose winter cough returns with a grim faithfulness every year you have known him. And you have come, over the years, to think of him almost as a marker of the season itself, for his first bad night of coughing tells you, more reliably than any change in the weather, that true winter has properly arrived. You go to him now, as you have gone every winter for years, finding him hunched by a fire that never quite seems to warm the whole small room, his breath rattling in a way that would frighten a less experienced ear, but that you recognize from long acquaintance as his particular winter pattern, worse some nights than others, never quite breaking into the deeper danger you watch for constantly, but never quite fully clearing either until spring finally returns. You brew him the same remedy you have brewed every winter, thyme and elderberry, and a good measure of honey, warmed and taken slowly through the worst hours of the night. And you sit with him a while by his thin fire, not because the visit strictly requires it, but because you have learned, across years of tending him, that his winters are hard in more ways than the cough alone accounts for. The particular loneliness of an old man whose children live too far to visit often, and whose wife has been gone many winters now. You bring him, alongside the herbs, a little conversation, a little news of the village, a warmth that has nothing to do with any remedy in your basket, and you have come to believe, quietly, that this second kind of tending matters every bit as much to his surviving each winter as the thyme and elderberry do. The younger households test you differently through these months. The small children whose chests seize with the particular tight, barking cough that frightens every parent who has ever heard it in the deep of a winter night. And you learn, across a long cold season, to move between these calls with the same steady, unhurried competence you bring to every kind of case. Mustard plasters for the worst congested chests, steam scented with pine and eucalyptus gathered and dried in better months, honey and onion syrup for the youngest throats too small yet for stronger remedies. You watch, always, for the harder signs, the fever that climbs rather than settles, the breathing that grows more labored rather than easing, the particular grey tone to a small face that tells an experienced eye when a case has moved beyond what home remedies alone can manage. And on the rare occasions when you see these signs, you act with a different urgency altogether, sitting through whatever remains of the night, if the case demands it, sending, if truly necessary, for whatever more serious help the distant town might offer, though such sendings are rare and desperate, and undertaken only when every gentler measure has already been tried. Winter asks something else of you too, something less visible than the steady round of coughs and chills, and that is a kind of endurance in your own body and spirit that the warmer seasons rarely demand so heavily. The walking is harder now, the lanes treacherous with ice, the cold itself a genuine danger to a healer caught out too long between one cottage and the next. You dress carefully before every winter call, layering wool against a cold that can numb careless fingers within minutes. And you have learned, through hard early lessons, never to underestimate how quickly a clear winter evening can turn into a genuine danger for anyone caught out in it unprepared. Your own household, too, must be kept warm and fed through these lean months. Your own stores, carefully husbanded alongside everything you keep in reserve for the village. And there are years when your own larder runs thinner than you would like, even as you keep the village supplied. A quiet sacrifice you have made often enough that it no longer feels like sacrifice, so much as simply the shape of the work. And yet, for all its hardship, winter carries its own particular gifts as well, gifts that the busier growing seasons rarely allow you time to notice. The long, dark evenings, once the day's calls are finally answered, offer a stillness that summer never quite provides. Hours by your own low fire to sort and label the gathered stores, to mend and clean your tools, to simply rest in a way the growing season's constant demands rarely permit. There is time, too, in these quiet winter evenings, for the kind of teaching that a busier season crowds out. A young girl from the village who has shown, across the past year, a particular curiosity about your craft, sitting with you by the fire as you sort dried herbs, asking questions you answer patiently, planting, without either of you quite naming it yet, the first quiet seeds of what might, in years to come, become the next chapter of this village's long, unbroken line of healers. There comes, every so often, a different kind of trouble altogether, one that does not knock politely at a single door, but seems instead to settle over the whole village at once. A rumor first, carried faster than any fever, that sickness has struck a neighboring parish hard, that whole households there lie low with something no one can quite name. Word like this travels along the same lanes that carry every other piece of news. A trader passing through, a carter returning from market, a cousin visiting from beyond the wood. And by the time it reaches your own door, it has usually grown larger and darker in the telling than whatever truth sits at its root. You feel the shift in the village almost before anyone says a word to you directly. A certain tightness in how people greet each other at the well, a wariness in how closely neighbors stand together that was not there a week before. Fear, once it takes hold of a whole community, rather than a single frightened household, behaves differently than the fear you know how to soothe in a single sick room. And you have learned, across years in this work, that your steadiness matters here more than in almost any other kind of case. For a healer who seems frightened confirms every fear the village is already circling, while a healer who remains visibly, believably calm can slow the spread of panic almost as surely as a good remedy slows the spread of illness itself. So you do what you have always done in such moments. You go looking for facts rather than waiting for rumor to keep filling the space where facts should be. You send word, or go yourself if the distance allows it, to learn plainly what is actually happening in the neighboring parish, what the illness truly looks like, how it spreads, how serious it has proven, rather than relying on the frightened, exaggerated version that has reached your own village second-hand and third-hand. More often than the darkest rumors suggest, you find the truth considerably gentler than its telling. A bad, but ordinary seasonal fever moving through a crowded household, not the sweeping catastrophe that fearful imagination had painted it as. Armed with the plainer truth, you do the quiet, patient work of carrying it back to your own village, not by making any grand announcement. For a healer standing before a gathered crowd declaring calm can sometimes do more to unsettle people than to soothe them. But the way you do everything else in this trade, one conversation at a time. At the well in doorways, over the low fence between gardens, answering the same worried questions again and again with the same steady, unhurried patience each time they are asked. You explain plainly what you have learned, what signs would actually matter if the illness did reach this parish, what simple precautions are worth taking, keeping a sick room's linens separate and well washed, keeping the well covered, airing a house where illness has settled rather than sealing it tight. You do not promise that nothing bad will happen, for false promises, once broken, cost a healer more trust than honest uncertainty ever does. You promise instead that you will be watching, that you will know quickly if real trouble does arrive here, and that the village need not carry the whole weight of dread on its own shoulders while you are doing that watching for them. There is a particular kind of leadership in this that has nothing to do with rank or office, and everything to do with the trust you have built across years of faithful, honest presence. The priest offers the village comfort of a different kind, spiritual and communal, and the two of you have learned, over years working the same small parish, to support rather than compete with each other's steadying influence, his prayers and your plain explanations reinforcing rather than contradicting one another in the minds of a frightened household. Together, in your different ways, you help the village hold its nerve, and more often than not, the feared sickness either never reaches this particular corner of the world at all, or arrives in a milder form than the rumor promised, and passes through with careful tending and without the disaster that fear, left unchecked, had imagined into being. This steadying work, unglamorous and mostly invisible, may in truth be one of the most valuable services you offer this village across your whole years of service here, though it rarely earns the same immediate gratitude that setting a broken bone or bringing down a raging fever earns. No one brings you a basket of eggs in thanks for a panic that never fully took hold. But you have come to understand, quietly, that a village that trusts its healer to tell it the truth, calmly and without exaggeration in either direction, weathers its hardest seasons far better than a village left alone with nothing but rumor to guide its fear, and that this trust, invisible as its rewards often are, is worth every patient hour it costs you to build and maintain. Your work, too, reaches further than the village's people alone, for in a place this dependent on its animals, a sick or injured beast threatens a household's whole livelihood every bit as seriously as a sick child threatens its heart. And you have learned, across years in this trade, that a good village healer's knowledge rarely stays neatly confined to human bodies alone. Let us walk with you now to the byre of a farmer whose best milking cow has gone off her feed. For this too, more often than town dwellers might imagine, falls within the wide scope of what a healer, this far from anywhere, is expected to understand. There is no separate trade here for tending animals, no farrier trained purely in the ailments of horses, no dedicated cattle doctor to to send for when a cow sickens. The farmer himself knows a great deal, of course, born and raised among his own animals. But when something goes truly wrong, when a familiar remedy fails, or a case grows more serious than ordinary husbandry can manage, it is very often your door he knocks upon, trusting that a healer skilled with plants and bodies generally will bring some useful insight, even to a trouble outside her most common practice. You examine the cow with the same patient, unhurried attentiveness you would bring to any human patient, noting her dull eyes, her reluctance to rise, the particular way she holds herself that speaks of some deep discomfort rather than simple stubbornness. Many of your remedies translate readily enough between the two kinds of patients. For the same plants that ease a fevered child's discomfort often ease an animal's in similar measure, though the doses shift considerably to account for the animal's greater size. A warm mash laced with ginger and fennel to settle a troubled stomach, a poultice of comfrey for a swollen joint or a wrenched leg, a careful dose of willow bark ground fine and mixed into feed for the deep ache of a beast too old and too valuable to simply be put down at the first sign of trouble. You have learned, too, the particular value a farm animal represents to a household that depends on it entirely. A milking cow's lost meaning, not simply grief, but genuine hunger for the children who depend on her milk through the coming season. A plough horse's lameness meaning a whole planting delayed and a whole year's harvest thrown into uncertainty. This weight sharpens your attention even beyond what a single sick beast might otherwise warrant, for you understand that in tending this cow, you are also, in a very real sense, tending the whole household that depends upon her. The cow recovers in the end, over several days of careful feeding and the remedies you have left behind. And the farmer's relief when she finally rises and takes feed properly again is every bit as heartfelt as any human patient's family has ever shown you. This wider reach of your knowledge, stretching beyond the purely human body into the whole working life of the farms around you, is simply one more thread in the vast, quietly woven fabric of what a village this far from anywhere asks its only healer to know. And you have come, across years of practice, to hold it not as a burden, but as one more way your work knits itself into the deep, practical heart of everything this small community depends upon to survive. Not every case you tend ends in recovery, and it would tell only a partial, falsely comforting story of this life to pretend otherwise. There is a particular kind of call that comes rarely, but comes eventually to every healer's door. The call that asks not for a cure, but for a steady, gentle presence through a passing that no herb or charm can prevent. And it is worth sitting with this part of the work honestly, for it shapes you every bit as deeply as any recovery ever does. An old woman in the village, whom you have known and tended for many years now, sends for you one evening not because anything sudden has gone wrong, but because she and her family both understand, with the plain, clear knowledge that sometimes comes near the very end of a long life, that her time is drawing close, and that what she wants from you now is not a remedy to fight against what is coming, but simply your steady presence to help her family through it, and perhaps something to ease whatever discomfort the final days bring. You sit with her often across these last weeks, and the medicine you offer shifts quietly, from the medicine of cure to the medicine of comfort, a tea of valerian and hops to ease her rest, a gentle rub of lavender oil into hands grown thin and worn with decades of hard work, honest, unhurried conversation when she wants it, and equally honest, comfortable silence when she does not. You have learned, across years of sitting at bedsides like this one, that a dying person often needs less from a healer than a frightened family imagines. Mostly simply the reassurance that pain will be gently managed, that they are not alone, and that whatever comes will be met with the same calm attention you have brought to every other chapter of their long life. You are present in the end, when she finally passes, quiet and unafraid, her family gathered close, and though there is grief in the room, thick and real, there is also, you notice, a particular gentleness to it, the grief of a life fully lived and peacefully closed, rather than the harder grief of a life cut short too soon. You do the last quiet tasks a healer is often trusted with in such a moment, helping the family prepare her body with the same careful, respectful hands you have used to tend every living patient across your years here. And you stay a while afterward, not because any specific task remains, but because your steady presence in a household's hardest hour is, in its own way, as much a part of your craft as any tincture or poultice ever was. You walk home slowly that night, the way you always do after such a call, feeling the particular weight that only this part of the work carries, and you have learned, over years, not to armor yourself entirely against that weight, for a healer who feels nothing at the end of a long life well tended has perhaps lost something important that the work is meant to keep alive in her. You grieve a little yourself, quietly, in your own cottage, and then, because the village's needs do not pause for your own grief any more than they pause for anything else, you rise the next morning and continue, carrying this loss alongside all the others you have carried across your years in this trade, each one adding its own quiet weight to the deep well of experience that makes you, season after season, a steadier and wiser healer than you were the year before. Not everyone who arrives at your door arrives already trusting you, and it is worth pausing on one such visit, because it shows something true about how your kind of knowledge sits alongside the grander, more formal learning of the wider world. A young cleric passes through the village one spring, traveling between two larger towns, and stays a few nights at the manor. And word of the local healer reaches him the way word of anything reaches a curious visitor in a small place through casual conversation over supper. He comes to your cottage the following afternoon, not because he is ill, but out of a polite, faintly skeptical curiosity. Having studied a little of the formal medicine taught in the schools and wondering, with the gentle condescension of the educated toward the untutored, what a village woman with no letters beyond her prayer book could possibly know of the body's true workings. You receive him as you receive everyone, warmly and without any particular defensiveness, and you show him, when he asks, what fills your shelves and jars, naming each preparation plainly, what it is for, how it is made, where it came from. He asks a few pointed questions, testing you a little, curious whether your practice rests on any real understanding or merely on inherited habit repeated without comprehension. You answer honestly, and where your knowledge is purely practical, learned through generations of careful observation, rather than through any formal theory of the humors or the body's hidden workings, you say so plainly, without embarrassment, For you have never claimed to be a physician, only a healer who has learned, through long attentive practice, what tends to help and what tends to harm. What surprises him, though he is gracious enough to say so aloud before he leaves, is how much of what you know lines up, in its practical effect, if not in its underlying explanation, with what he has read in the grander texts of his own schooling. Your careful use of willow bark for pain and fever mirrors, though you could not have named it in his learned language, treatments described in ancient texts you have never read. Your instinct for cleanliness at a birth, your patient washing and clean linen, achieves outcomes every bit as good, and by his own admission sometimes considerably better than some of the more elaborate procedures practiced by physicians in the towns he has studied in. He leaves the following morning with, you suspect, a slightly humbled respect for a kind of knowledge his schooling had taught him to overlook, knowledge built not from books, but from centuries of village women and men watching closely, trying carefully, and passing forward only what truly seemed to help. You do not think much more about the visit once he has gone, for such encounters are rare, and your work does not pause to dwell on a stranger's changed opinion. But it leaves you quietly, with a settled confidence that serves you well in the years that follow, a knowledge that your craft, however humble its origins, and however far from any university's grand halls, holds its own kind of truth, tested not in disputation but in the plain, repeated evidence of bodies healed, fevers broken, births brought safely through, over years and years of patient practice. The year turns, as it always does, and there is no season quite so gentle to your spirit as the slow unfolding of spring after a long, demanding winter, and it is worth lingering here a while, for this season carries its own particular rhythm within your work. The frost finally loosens its grip on the garden, and the first green shoots push up through soil that has sat bare and sleeping for months. And you find yourself, on the first truly warm morning, simply standing at the garden's edge, watching, feeling something in your own chest loosen alongside the thawing ground. The work does not slow so much as it changes its character entirely. Where winter asks patient endurance, spring asks a different kind of attentiveness. Watching the garden's first shoots to know which plants have survived the cold and which beds want receding. Walking the hedge again after months away to see what the wild green world has begun offering anew. The nettle is often first, pushing up eager and sharp-edged along every ditch and hedge bottom, and you gather it early and often through these weeks, for its iron-rich strength does particular good to bodies that have spent a long winter on thin, meager fare, and you steep it into soups and teas for household after household, watching color slowly return to cheeks that have gone pale and drawn through the hardest months. There is a lightness to the calls that come through these weeks too, fewer of the deep winter coughs, more of the small ordinary complaints that mark a village stirring back into its fuller life, a strain back from the first hard days of ploughing, a child's scraped knee from play that winter's cold had kept indoors and now sends running eagerly back outside. You find your own basket, across these weeks, growing lighter in a different sense than it grew light through the depths of winter's need. And there is a kind of joy in this lightness that you have learned to savor rather than take for granted, knowing, from years of watching the wheel turn, how quickly the busy demands of summer and then the gathering urgency of another autumn will fill your days again. Spring, too, is when new life seems to arrive most thickly. Not only in the greening garden, but in the village itself, and you find yourself, across these weeks, attending an unusual run of births, as though the whole parish's rhythm of new life has quietly synchronized itself to the season's own renewal. Each birth carries its own particular story, its own small triumphs, and occasional hard moments. But there is something in attending new life during this particular season, everything around you pushing eagerly up out of winter's dark rest, that lends even the hardest of these births a certain hopefulness that a winter birth, however well it goes, rarely carries in quite the same measure. You have, by now, across your years in this trade, taken on more formally what began as a quiet habit through the long winter evenings. The teaching of a young girl from the village, whose curiosity about your craft has only deepened with each passing season. She comes to you regularly now, not merely to sit and watch as she once did, but to work alongside you, gathering herbs under your patient direction, learning to identify each plant by leaf and scent and season, beginning slowly to understand the deeper logic beneath what once seemed to her simply a collection of separate remedies. You teach her the way you yourself were taught, not through any formal lesson delivered all at once, but through the accumulated weight of shared practice, correcting her gently when she reaches for the wrong plant, praising her quietly when her instinct proves sound, letting her attend the smaller, gentler cases at your side long before you would ever let her near the harder ones alone. You watch her grow more confident across these months, her hands steadier, her questions sharper and more discerning, and you feel, watching this slow unfolding, a particular satisfaction that has little to do with your own reputation or your own accomplishments. The satisfaction of watching a craft you love find a new pair of hands, willing to carry it forward. There is real patience required in this teaching, more perhaps than in almost any other part of your work, for you must resist the urge to simply do everything yourself, faster and more surely than her still learning hands can manage, and instead let her make the small, forgivable mistakes that true learning requires, standing close enough to catch anything truly dangerous, but far enough back to let her own judgment develop its own strength. You remember your own teacher's patience with you in exactly this same way, years ago, and you understand now, from the other side of that same relationship, how much quiet discipline such patience actually demands. The village, too, marks the turning of its own year with its own gentle rhythms of gathering and rest. And there comes, most years, a feast day, some marker of the church's calendar or the older calendar of the seasons beneath it, when the whole parish sets aside its usual labor for a single day of shared food and music and rest. You attend these gatherings gladly when your work allows it, and you find, on these rare days, a different kind of appreciation shown toward you than the quiet, steady gratitude of an ordinary sickroom visit. You are seated on such days among the honored elders of the village, rather than at its edges, offered the choicest portions of whatever feast the whole community has gathered, toasted, sometimes, in a few warm, half-joking words, by whoever leads the gathering's festivities, words that name you plainly as one of the village's true treasures, the steady hand that has carried half the parish safely through its hardest nights. You accept this warmth with the same quiet humility you bring to everything else in your work, a little embarrassed by open praise, more comfortable in the unglamorous daily labor of the craft than in its rare public celebration, but grateful all the same for this reminder that the whole slow, patient work of years has not gone unnoticed by the very people it has served. These feast days offer you, too, something rarer still in your busy life, an entire day without a single expected call. A day you can simply sit among your neighbors, watch children too young to remember your name, yet nonetheless waving at you across the green. Listen to old stories told again for the 100th time by the fire, and feel, for these few precious hours, not the healer standing slightly apart with her basket of remedies, but simply one more soul among many, belonging fully and easily to a place that has, across years of faithful work, become as much your family as any blood relation ever could. There is a particular kind of trouble that tests you in a way none of your usual cases quite manage, and it comes one summer when the weather turns strange, weeks of heavy, close heat followed by heavier rain, and the village well, the one shared source that half the households draw from, begins to taste faintly wrong to those with a careful palate. Before long, a scattering of households across that half of the village fall ill together, cramping bellies and weakening bodies, too many cases arriving too close together in time to be simple coincidence. And you understand, quickly, that something has gone wrong with the water itself rather than with any single unlucky household's food. This kind of case asks something different of you than a single fever or a single birth ever does, for you are not simply treating bodies one at a time. You are trying to understand a cause that threatens the whole shared life of half the village at once. You walk to the well itself and look at it with fresh, suspicious eyes, noting what you had perhaps grown too familiar to notice before. The low stone wall around it cracked in one place, close enough to a drainage ditch that the heavy rains of recent weeks may well have carried something foul down into the water below. You cannot prove this with anything like certainty, not with the tools and understanding available to you, but you have learned, across years of careful observation, to trust a strong pattern even without a fully proven cause behind it. You act on your suspicion regardless of your uncertainty, for waiting for perfect proof while people continue sickening would serve no one well. You go to whoever holds authority over such shared village matters, likely the reeve or the manor steward, and you argue plainly and firmly for the well to be closed and cleaned at once, the cracked wall repaired, the water tested carefully before anyone draws from it again, urging every household in the meantime toward the second well at the village's far edge, however inconvenient the longer walk proves for those used to the nearer source. There is some resistance to this, as there often is when inconvenience is asked of people who do not yet fully understand the danger, but your accumulated years of trust carry weight here, and the village, on the whole, defers to your judgment even without full understanding of your reasoning. Meanwhile, you tend the sickened households with the plain remedies your craft has always offered for such troubles. Plenty of clean boiled water taken in small, frequent sips, rather than large draughts the weakened stomach cannot hold, a tea of mint and chamomile to settle the worst cramping. Careful watching for the small children and old folk whose bodies have the least reserve to withstand a hard bout of sickness like this one. Most recover within days once the tainted well is closed, and the second well takes its place, though it is an anxious stretch of days regardless. Watching closely for any case that seems to be worsening rather than settling, and you sleep little and walk far through that whole difficult week. The well is repaired eventually, its cracked wall rebuilt properly, and once it is reopened and the sickness does not return, the village's quiet trust in your judgment deepens further still, for you had acted, in this case, not merely as a healer treating symptoms as they arrived, but as something closer to a guardian of the whole community's health, reasoning carefully from pattern and observation toward a cause few others had thought to suspect. It is exactly this kind of case, rare but real, that shows most clearly why a village values its healer so deeply, not merely for curing what has already gone wrong, but for the careful, watchful mind that sometimes catches trouble before it grows any larger than it already has. You are older now, though the years have moved so steadily and so quietly around you that it is difficult to say exactly when the change crept in. Your own hands, once as sure and quick as any young healer's, have grown a little slower at the finer tasks. Your own knees ache a little on the coldest mornings, the way your patients' knees have always ached, and the long walks to the farthest edges of the parish leave you more tired than they once did. You have not stopped the work, not by any means, but you notice, more and more, how gladly you now lean on the young woman who has spent years now at your side, her own hands grown sure and steady under your long patient teaching, her own judgment tested and proven across enough cases, now that you trust her increasingly to handle what once only you could handle alone. There is no formal ceremony for this passing of a craft, no examination to sit or certificate to earn, only the same slow, accumulated process by which everything in this trade has always transferred from one set of hands to the next. You send her, more and more often now, to answer the calls that come at the harder hours, staying behind yourself with a certain relief you had not expected to feel, trusting that what you have taught her across these years will carry her through whatever she finds. She comes back to you afterward, most nights, describing what she found and what she did, and you listen carefully, offering what guidance still seems needed, praising freely when her judgment has proven sound, which it increasingly does. You feel, watching this slow transfer unfold, a mixture of feelings that surprises you a little in its complexity. There is a natural ache in stepping back from work that has defined the whole shape of your adult life, a small grief in watching your own hands grow less central to the village's daily needs, even as you understand, plainly, that this stepping back is exactly as it should be. But there is, alongside that ache, a deeper and steadier satisfaction that grows larger the more you sit with it, the satisfaction of knowing that this village will not be left without a healer when your own strength finally fails entirely, that the deep well of knowledge passed to you by your own teacher, and to her by whoever taught her before, will not end with you, but will continue, carried forward now, by hands you yourself train, into a future you will not fully see, but have nonetheless helped shape. You think, on quiet evenings now, back across the whole long arc of this life you have lived, the decades of knocks answered at every hour, the fevers broken, and the births attended, The eggs and bread and mended fences that paid for a lifetime's steady work, the losses that still ache faintly even after so many years. The trust built so slowly and guarded so carefully across every single one of those years. It has not been an easy life. By any measure a comfortable town dweller might apply to it, and yet you would not trade it, not for all the coin and comfort such a town dweller might imagine themselves to possess instead, for you have belonged, completely and unmistakably, to a place and a people who needed exactly what you had to give, and precious few lives, in any age, offer a soul that particular, deep, and settled kind of meaning. Let us go back a little to an earlier autumn and sit with one more case that shows the particular resourcefulness this work so often demands. For it is easy, hearing only of fevers gently broken and children safely birthed, to forget how much quiet ingenuity a healer, this far from any proper surgeon, must summon when a wound turns genuinely dangerous. A young man from the mill comes to you one evening with a deep gash along his forearm, caught on a piece of broken machinery, and though you clean and bind it carefully that same night, he does not return to have it checked as you instructed, and by the time his worried mother finally brings him to your door some days later, the wound has begun to fester badly, the skin around it hot and swollen and darkening in a way that tells your experienced eye exactly how serious this has become. You do not panic, though the case is genuinely grave, for a wound left to fester this long can, left unchecked further, cost a man his whole arm, or worse, his life. You set to work at once, cleaning the wound thoroughly with well-boiled water, cutting away the small amount of clearly dead tissue at its edges with a blade kept scrupulously clean for exactly this purpose, and packing it generously with honey, whose quiet antiseptic power you have relied upon your whole career, without ever needing the language later ages would use to explain why it works. You bind it loosely rather than tightly, for a festering wound needs air and drainage, rather than a tight seal that traps corruption within, and you dose him besides with a strong tea of echinacea root, dug and dried in better seasons for exactly this kind of trouble, believing, from long observation, that it strengthens the body's own fight against whatever has taken hold. You do not let him leave your care this time, keeping him at your own cottage for several days, where you can watch the wound closely, changing the honey, dressing morning and night, watching for the darkening to spread further or, with relief, watching it slowly begin to recede instead. It is a tense several days, and you do not sleep easily through any of them, checking the wound at odd hours through the night, the way you might check a fevered child, for you know how quickly such a case can turn from bad to fatal if the corruption finds its way properly into the blood. But the honey and the careful cleaning and the strong tea together do their patient work, and by the week's end the worst of the darkness has receded, the swelling has begun to ease, and you allow yourself, finally, a full night's proper sleep for the first time in days. He keeps the arm in the end, though the scar runs pale and puckered along its length for the rest of his life, and every time you see him afterward, working steadily at the mill with both arms intact, you feel a particular quiet satisfaction that has nothing to do with any thanks he offers, and everything to do with knowing how differently this same case might have ended without your careful, patient tending. This is the part of the work that asks the most of your nerve, and your steady hands both, the cases that could truly go either way, and you have learned, across enough of them now, to trust the patient, unglamorous rhythm of clean watch, dress again, clean watch, dress again, more than any single dramatic remedy, for it is this steady repetition, more than any one clever trick, that turns most of these hard cases back from the brink. Not every wound you tend sits on the surface of the body, and it would leave an important part of your craft untold to speak only of fevers and breaks and births, for there is a quieter kind of suffering that comes to your door too, one with no visible wound at all, and it asks a different, gentler kind of medicine than anything kept in your jars and bottles. A young man returns to the village one autumn from a long spell away, serving in the retinue of a lord gone to settle some distant dispute, and though his body has come home whole, something in him plainly has not, a heaviness behind his eyes, a silence where his old, easy laughter used to sit, a restlessness at night that his family, worried and unsure what to do, eventually brings to you. You have seen this kind of trouble before, across your years in this work, though it wears different faces in different people. Sometimes a soldier returned changed from whatever he saw on some distant campaign. Sometimes a mother whose grief for a lost child has settled into something heavier and more lasting than ordinary mourning. Sometimes simply a soul worn thin by a hard, grinding season of loss piled upon loss. You do not have a single herb that cures this the way yarrow cures a fever, and you have learned, with some humility, that pretending otherwise would do this young man more harm than good. What you offer instead is a slower, more patient kind of care. Valerian and lemon balm to ease the sleeplessness that so often accompanies this heaviness. But more than that, simply your steady, unhurried presence, sitting with him regularly, letting him speak when he wishes to, and sit silent when he does not, never pressing him toward a cheerfulness he does not yet feel. You have learned, across years of tending such quiet wounds, that what most helps is not any single remedy, but the accumulated weight of being truly seen and steadily accompanied through a darkness that words alone cannot quickly dispel. You encourage his family, gently, in how to be patient with him, explaining, as best your own understanding allows, that this kind of heaviness lifts slowly, if it lifts at all, and that scolding him toward a false brightness will only drive the trouble deeper rather than easing it. You walk with him sometimes, when he is willing, along the same hedgerows where you gather your herbs, finding that the quiet, undemanding company of a slow walk through green, growing things does more for him some days than any tea you could brew. It takes the better part of a year, but he does slowly find his way back to something closer to himself, the laughter returning first only rarely, and then more often, the restless nights growing gradually calmer. And though you could never point to any single remedy and say this is what healed him, you know, from long experience, that the slow accumulated care of many small unhurried visits did what no single dramatic treatment ever could have managed alone. This part of your craft, tending what cannot be seen as readily as a broken bone or a raging fever, may in truth be among the most quietly important work you do. For a village that only tended its visible wounds while ignoring its invisible ones would be a harder, colder place than the one you have spent your whole life patiently helping to hold together. The years continue their long, steady turning, and there comes Eventually, an evening much like the one where we began this walk together, except that it is not you who rises at the knock this time. You lie warm in your bed, older now, listening as the young woman you trained rises instead, moving surely through the same dark cottage, gathering her own basket, now stocked and arranged by her own careful hand rather than yours, and steps out into the same cold night to answer a need that, once, only you could have answered. You do not feel diminished by this, lying there listening to her sure footsteps fade down the lane. You feel, instead, a settled, quiet pride that has grown large enough, across the years, to hold both a small ache of nostalgia and a deep contentment together without contradiction. You think, in that quiet moment before sleep finally reclaims you, of your own teacher, gone now many years, and you understand, more fully perhaps than at any earlier point in this long life, the particular gift she gave you when she chose you all those years ago to carry this work forward. It was never really about the herbs alone, or the remedies, or even the trust so patiently built across so many years of faithful visits. It was about a village never being left alone in its hardest hours. A chain of steady hands reaching back further than anyone now living can properly remember, and reaching forward now, through the young woman walking confidently down the dark lane below your window, into a future you will not fully see but have helped, in your own patient way, to keep unbroken. Let us return, for a while, to an earlier and busier season, for there is one more thread of this life worth following, the rare and eagerly awaited arrival of the travelling peddler, who passes through the parish perhaps twice in a good year, carrying in his heavy packs the few remedies that no garden or hedgerow in this cold northern country could ever hope to grow. Word of his coming travels ahead of him by a day or more, and you find yourself, on the appointed morning, walking to the crossroads near the church with a particular anticipation you allow yourself so rarely elsewhere in your steady, unhurried life. He unpacks his wares on a cloth spread across the crossroads stone, and among the ribbons and buckles and small trinkets that draw the younger villagers close, you seek out the small, carefully wrapped parcels that matter most to your own trade, a twist of dried ginger root, carried up from ports you will never see yourself, a small vial of clove oil precious enough that you measure it out afterward in careful drops, rather than generous spoonfuls, perhaps in a good year, a thumb-sized knot of frankincense resin, burned sparingly in the sick room of whichever household can least afford its own fear, for the old belief holds that its smoke steadies a frightened mind, and you have found, across years of watching, that the belief does no harm and often visibly helps. You trade for these treasures the way you trade for everything else in this life, not with coin, which you keep carefully reserved for such rare occasions precisely, because they are rare, but sometimes with dried herbs of your own, that the peddler knows he can sell again in some other village further down his long circuit, sometimes with a length of good cloth or a jar of your own honey, the whole transaction unfolding slowly, without urgency, two people who understand each other's trade taking their time over a fair exchange. You ask him, too, for news. For a man who walks such long roads between so many scattered villages, carries more than goods in his heavy packs, and you listen carefully to whatever he can tell you of remedies used elsewhere, troubles faced in other parishes, the slow drift of rumor and knowledge, that moves along these same well-worn roads. You carry your small parcels home carefully, rationing them out across the months ahead with a discipline that would seem strange to anyone accustomed to a well-stocked shop. A single drop of clove oil for the very worst toothache rather than any lesser complaint. A pinch of the precious ginger saved for whichever fever proves most stubborn to your usual remedies. This scarcity, though it sometimes frustrates you, teaches its own quiet lesson too, a deep appreciation for what your own garden and hedge provide so freely and reliably compared to these rare, dearly won treasures from distant places, and you find yourself, more often than not, reaching first for the common plants growing outside your own door, before ever touching the precious hoarded stores from the crossroads trade. There is a different kind of test that comes rarely but comes eventually, the hardest kind of night this work can offer, when two urgent calls arrive at nearly the same hour, and there is only one of you to answer both. It happens one autumn evening, a messenger arriving breathless from the eastern edge of the parish, just as you are readying yourself to answer an equally urgent call already waiting at the western edge. A household with a child in a bad fever, and at almost the same moment, word of a hard fall from a hayrick that has left a young farmhand badly injured. You have only seconds, really, to weigh what any careful judgment must weigh in such a moment, which trouble truly cannot wait, and which, however frightening, may hold steady a little longer with the right instruction left behind. You question the messenger from the eastern household quickly, but thoroughly, learning that the fever, though high, has not brought the harder signs you watch for most closely. No convulsion, no dangerous grey pallor, and you judge, with the confidence that years of exactly this kind of triage have built in you, that this case can be safely managed for an hour or two longer, with careful instruction left, in a steady mother's capable hands, while the fall from the hayrick, with its danger of broken bones or worse, cannot wait at all. You give the eastern messenger clear, careful instructions to carry back at a run, exactly what tea to brew, exactly how to sponge the fever down, and a firm promise that you will come the moment you are able. And then you turn west, moving as quickly as the dark lane allows toward the more urgent trouble. It is, in truth, one of the hardest decisions your work regularly asks of you, not because the choice itself is unclear once you have gathered enough information to make it, but because the moments before you have gathered that information, standing at your own door with two urgent needs pulling at you from opposite directions, ask a particular steadiness that no amount of herbal knowledge alone can provide. Both cases, in the end, resolve well, the fallen farmhand's injuries proving serious but treatable, the fevered child's mother managing capably with your instructions until you can reach her exhausted household well after midnight. But you carry the lesson of that night with you afterward, a clearer understanding of your own limits, one healer able to be in only one place at any given hour, and a renewed appreciation for the young woman you have begun training more seriously in the years since. For you have come to understand that a night like this one is precisely the kind of night when a second trained pair of hands, capable of answering one call while you answer the other, becomes not simply a convenience but a genuine safeguard for the whole village's well-being. Amid all this steady demand, there are, mercifully, quieter hours too, and it would misrepresent this life entirely to describe only its urgencies and its hard cases without also naming the gentler stretches that fill far more of your actual days than any single dramatic call ever does. Most evenings, once the day's ordinary business has settled, and no urgent knock disturbs the quiet, you find yourself simply sitting by your own low fire, a cup of some favorite tea warming your hands, mending a torn hem or sorting the day's gathered herbs with the unhurried attention of someone who has, for this one small stretch of hours, nowhere else that needs her. These quiet hours matter more to the whole rhythm of your work than they might first appear to for a healer who never rests, eventually has nothing left to offer when true urgency finally arrives. And you have learned, across years of hard experience, to guard these small pockets of stillness as carefully as you guard any rarer treasure. You read, sometimes, from the few books your parish possesses, mostly scripture, but occasionally some older herbal text passed hand to hand across the years, copied and recopied by patient scribes long before you were born. And you find a particular satisfaction in matching what such old texts describe against your own accumulated practical knowledge, confirming here, quietly disagreeing there, adding your own small observations to a tradition far older and larger than your own single lifetime. Summer, when it finally arrives in full, brings its own particular character to your work, warmer and busier in different ways than either the gentle unfolding of spring or the demanding grip of winter. The haying season especially tests the whole village's strength. Every able hand turned toward the fields through long, hot days that stretch from before dawn until well past dusk. And it is through these weeks that you see most clearly how hard, unglamorous physical labor takes its own particular toll on bodies pushed to their limits under a beating summer sun. You walk out to the fields themselves, sometimes during these weeks, your basket adapted for a different kind of trouble than the winter's coughs. Willow bark and mint for the pounding headaches that a long day's heat brings on, a salve of aloe you have carefully nursed through the colder months in a sheltered corner of your garden, ready now for the sunburned necks and forearms of workers who have spent too many hours bent beneath an unforgiving sky. You watch, too, for the more serious danger of the heat itself, the older workers especially, whose bodies manage the summer's demands less easily than they once did. And you have learned, across enough hard seasons, to recognize the early signs of a body truly overwhelmed by heat, a particular pale clamminess, a confusion in speech that has nothing to do with simple tiredness, and you do not hesitate, when you see these signs, to insist firmly that the affected worker rest in shade at once, cooled with water and given weak salted water to sip slowly. Whatever the pressure of an unfinished field might otherwise demand of him, there is joy in this season too, alongside its labor. For haying done well brings its own deep satisfaction to a whole village that knows exactly what a full hay barn means for the animals through the coming winter. And you share in this satisfaction as fully as anyone, for your own small goat and the few hens that share your cottage yard depend on the same careful provision as every other household's livestock. You lend your own hands to the harder work when your other duties allow it, gathering and turning hay alongside your neighbors, grateful for these rare stretches when your usual role as healer sets aside for an afternoon, and you become, simply, one more pair of hands helping bring in a shared harvest. The village marks its joys as carefully as it marks its sorrows, and a wedding, when one comes, draws you into its preparations in a way that has little to do with medicine directly, and everything to do with your settled place among these people. A young couple from two of the village's older families are to be wed one early summer morning, and the bride's mother comes to you some days before, not for any remedy, but to ask, with a shy hopefulness, whether you might prepare a small posy of herbs for the occasion, the old custom holding that certain plants woven into a bridal bouquet carry their own quiet blessing toward a long and fertile marriage. You gather what the custom calls for with the same careful attention you bring to any of your work: sprigs of rosemary for remembrance and fidelity, a little lavender for calm and lasting affection, ivy woven through for its old symbol of binding faithfulness, and you tie them together the evening before with a length of ribbon the bride's mother has provided, setting the small bundle in water overnight so it stays fresh and fragrant for the morning. You attend the wedding itself when your other duties allow, standing among the gathered village rather than at its edges for once, watching the young couple exchange their vows before the priest with the same quiet satisfaction you feel at any of the village's better occasions, a reminder, amid all the fevers and hard cases that fill so much of your ordinary work, that this life you tend is not only about illness and difficulty, but about the whole full arc of what a human life contains: birth and growth and love, and eventually its own gentle ending. You have thought, across your years in this trade, a good deal about how your practical craft sits alongside the church's teaching, for the priest and you are, in your different ways, both tending to the same small flock of souls, and you have never found the two callings to sit in any real conflict, whatever a stranger might assume from the outside. You pray, in your own quiet way, before difficult cases, not instead of reaching for your herbs, but alongside reaching for them, finding no contradiction in asking for a steady hand while also trusting the plain, provable virtue of willow bark and honey and careful cleaning. The priest, for his part, has never once discouraged your work, understanding, in his own wisdom, that a village needs both kinds of comfort. The comfort of prayer for what lies beyond any earthly remedy's reach, and the comfort of a steady, skilled hand for what plain, patient care can actually mend. There have been a few, over your many years here, who muttered that your closeness to the old plant lore, the charms alongside the herbs, sat uneasily beside proper faith. But such muttering has never taken deep root in this particular village, for the proof of your work stands too plainly before everyone's eyes: fevers broken, births brought safely through, wounds closed clean rather than left to fester, results that speak for themselves regardless of whatever theological unease a rare suspicious soul might harbor. You have come to hold your own quiet peace about this, trusting that faith and careful, patient craft were never truly meant to stand opposed to one another, both simply different faces of the same deep, abiding care for the same beloved, fragile human bodies and the souls that inhabit them. There is one particular winter that you still think back on more than most. Years later, a cold snap harder than any you can otherwise remember, the kind of deep, biting frost that settles over a whole region and does not lift for nearly a fortnight, the well water freezing solid overnight, the animals huddled close in barns banked high with extra straw, every household burning through its wood stores faster than any of them had planned for. Word reaches you one such night, carried by a frightened boy who has run the whole distance from a small outlying farmstead, that a family there, an elderly couple, and their 2 young grandchildren left in their care, have let their fire die low through some mishap, and the cottage has grown dangerously cold. You do not hesitate, though the cold outside is genuinely dangerous, wrapping yourself as warmly as your stores allow, gathering blankets alongside your usual basket, and setting out at once into a night so cold that the air itself seems to bite at any exposed skin within moments. The walk is hard, harder than almost any other you have made in this whole long life of walking, to wherever you are needed, the ground treacherous with ice beneath old snow, your own breath freezing on the wool wrapped across your face, and you keep your pace steady and controlled rather than rushing, for you have learned, even in true emergency, that a healer who exhausts herself or falls badly on the way to a case helps no one at all. You arrive to find the cottage genuinely frigid, the old fire reduced to a few faint embers, the grandchildren huddled together under every blanket the household owns, their small bodies shivering in a way that tells you plainly how close this trouble has come to turning truly dangerous. You move quickly but calmly, rebuilding the fire from the kindling you find still dry near the hearth, working it up steadily, rather than trying to force too much flame too fast into a chimney gone cold. And once the fire has properly caught, you turn to the children themselves, wrapping them in the extra blankets you carried, warming their small hands slowly between your own, rather than too near the fire's sudden heat, for you have learned that a body chilled too deeply must be warmed gradually rather than shocked back toward warmth all at once. You brew a warm, sweetened tea for the whole household once the fire is properly established, ginger and a little of your precious hoarded honey. And you sit with them through the remaining hours of that bitter night, feeding the fire steadily, watching the children's shivering finally ease into something closer to ordinary sleepy stillness, watching the old couple's own strained faces slowly relax as the danger passes. You do not leave until the grey light of morning has fully arrived, and you are certain the fire will hold and the household has recovered its proper warmth, and you walk home again through a morning nearly as cold as the night had been, exhausted in the particular way that only a night spent fighting against genuine danger leaves a body. You think of that night often in the years that follow, not because it ended badly, for it did not, the whole family recovering fully within days with nothing worse than the fright itself to remember it by, but because it reminded you, more plainly than almost any other single night in this long career, of what it truly means to be the only healer for miles in a world that offers so little margin for error against the hardest edges of nature itself. There was no one else to send for that night, no larger system of aid to call upon, only your own 2 feet on a treacherous frozen road, and whatever skill and steadiness you carried with you. And you came through it, as you have come through so much else across this long life, not through any single dramatic gift, but through the same patient, unhurried competence that has carried you through every other hard night this work has ever asked of you. Looking back now, across the whole long sweep of this life we have walked through together tonight. From that very first knock before dawn to this quiet, settled evening so many years further on, you can see, perhaps more clearly than you ever could while living it day by day, what this village has actually taught you across all these seasons. It taught you that trust cannot be bought or claimed, only earned, slowly, visit by patient visit, and guarded carefully once it is finally won. It taught you that the plainest remedies, honey and clean water, and a steady, unhurried hand, do more good more often than any grand or dramatic intervention ever could. It taught you that a body's fear matters every bit as much as its fever, and that a healer who tends only the visible wound, while ignoring the frightened heart beneath her, it has not truly finished her work. And it taught you, perhaps above everything else, that a whole life spent belonging completely to one small, particular place known and needed by every soul within its bounds is a wealth no amount of coin could ever properly measure. Before we finish this long, slow walk together, let us pause once more in your cottage on an ordinary quiet evening, and simply let me name for you what sits ready on your low wooden shelf, the small, steady army of remedies that stands behind every visit we have followed tonight. For there is a particular calm in simply hearing such things named slowly, one after another, and it seems a fitting way to settle before we finally let this long day close. There is honey, kept in a wide clay pot near the hearth, gathered from your own few hives at the garden's edge, used for coughs and wounds and sore throats alike, perhaps the single most versatile remedy on the whole shelf. There is yarrow, dried and bundled, reach for whenever a fever needs gentle coaxing downward. There is elderflower beside it, and the darker elderberry syrup in its own small jar, the two together carrying your household through nearly every winter chill the parish suffers. There is chamomile, soft and pale for restless children and restless nerves alike, steeped into a tea that has settled more anxious evenings than you could ever properly count. There is comfrey, its broad dried leaves ready for any sprain or ache, its old country name of knitbone earned honestly through generations of careful use on exactly the kind of injury its name suggests. There is plantain, humble and overlooked by most who walk past it in the lane, yet drawn upon constantly for stings and small cuts, and the itch of a nettle's careless brush. There is lavender, bundled by the doorway as much for its calming scent as for its many small uses in salve and sleep pillow, its purple heads a small daily comfort, even before any remedy is made from them. There is nettle, sharp to gather but gentle in its effect, strengthening the blood of anyone left weak and pale after illness or a hard birth. There is willow bark, stripped carefully and dried, your steady answer to pain and fever both, used sparingly but reliably whenever a case calls for something a little stronger than the gentler herbs alone provide. There is garlic, plated and hanging near the door, ready for the deep chest colds of winter. There is mustard seed in its small jar, waiting for the rare case that calls for its particular warming fire. There is fennel, sweet and gentle, settling the stomachs of the youngest patients who cannot yet take anything stronger. There is rosemary for aching memory and tired spirits, sage for the throat and the digestion both, thyme woven through nearly every winter remedy your shelf provides. There is beeswax rendered and stored, waiting to become the base of whatever salve the coming week demands. There is a small store of vinegar infused with rose petals from last summer's garden, ready for a fevered brow. There is valerian root, its scent strange and earthy, kept for the hardest nights of sleeplessness and grief. There is your small hoarded store from the crossroads trade too, the clove oil measured in careful drops, the ginger kept for only the most stubborn cases, the little knot of frankincense burned rarely, and only when a frightened household most needs its old, steadying comfort. And there are the plainer tools beside the jars, a needle and strong thread, boiled clean and kept ready for whatever wound needs closing. A small sharp blade, kept honed and clean, used only for the careful, work no gentler method can accomplish. Clean linen, always more of it than seems necessary, because you learned long ago that a healer never truly has too much clean linen on hand. A mortar and pestle worn smooth by years of grinding. A collection of small clay pots and stoppered vials, each one labeled in your own private system of marks, each one representing some small portion of a whole life's patient learning. This is the whole quiet arsenal behind everything we have walked through tonight. Nothing grand, nothing that any wealthy town apothecary shop could not match many times over in quantity and variety, and yet enough, season after season, year after year, to meet nearly everything this village has ever asked of you. It is not the size of the shelf that has carried you through this long life of service. It is the patient knowledge of exactly what stands upon it, and exactly when and how much of it to reach for, built slowly across decades of careful watching, careful listening, and careful, unhurried practice. The evening has grown properly late now, wherever we have imagined ourselves standing together throughout this long walk, and the fire in your small hearth has burned down to its own gentle, glowing embers. There is no knock at the door tonight, or if there is, it waits politely for a moment longer while we finish this last quiet stretch together. You sit a while longer in the low light, the shelf of remedies standing silent and ready behind you, the garden sleeping dark beyond the window, the whole scattered parish settling, one household at a time, into its own night's rest, trusting, as it has trusted for so many years now, that you or the steady young woman you trained will be there, waiting whenever the next knock finally comes. Let us walk through one more case before we let this long day finally close, for it shows something gentle about this life that is easy to overlook amid all its harder tests. A stranger passes through the village one late summer afternoon, a journeyman of some trade heading toward the town beyond the wood, and he falls ill on the road itself, taken with a fever that leaves him too weak to continue walking. He is found resting against a milestone by a farmer returning from the fields, and brought, as anyone in trouble in this parish is brought, straight to your door, though he is no one's neighbor and no one's kin, and has no basket of eggs to offer in payment for whatever care he receives. You take him in without a second thought, for this too is simply part of the shape of the work. A healer this far from anywhere does not ask first whether a sick stranger belongs to the village before deciding whether to help him. You settle him in the small spare corner of your cottage, brew the same fever tea you would brew for any neighbor's child, sponge his brow with the same cool water, and sit with him through the worst of the fever's first night, exactly as attentively as you would sit with anyone else. He is frightened, alone among strangers in a strange place, and you offer him the same steady calm you offer every frightened patient, telling him plainly what you are doing and why, answering his questions honestly, letting your own unhurried confidence settle some of his fear. He recovers within a few days, the fever proving nothing more serious than an ordinary travel sickness brought on by hard walking and poor rest, and he thanks you before he continues on his delayed journey, with what little coin he can spare, pressed into your hand with a gratitude made deeper by how far from home he found himself when trouble struck. You do not need the coin, not truly, for the village's steady support already keeps your household fed, but you accept it graciously all the same, understanding that refusing it would deny him the dignity of repaying a kindness, however small a portion of that kindness his thin purse can actually match. This small case, unremarkable in almost every way, has stayed with you across the years as a quiet reminder of something true about this whole calling, that the care you offer was never truly bounded by the edges of the parish itself, however much your daily work is shaped by those familiar lanes and familiar faces. Whoever knocks, whoever is carried to your door, whatever their name or their home or their ability to pay, receives the same steady, patient attention you would offer your dearest neighbor. And you have come to believe quietly that this open-handed readiness, extended even to a passing stranger with nothing to offer in return, is itself one of the deepest and truest measures of what this work has always actually meant. There is a particular case, too, from your middle years in this trade, that tested every part of your accumulated skill at once, and it is worth telling now, gently, before we finally let the evening close, for it shows how far a steady hand and years of patient learning can carry a healer even through the hardest kind of trouble. A young mother's labor turns difficult in a way you have only rarely encountered before, the child positioned wrongly within the womb, feet rather than head leading the way, a trouble that even now, in later ages with far greater knowledge, still asks real skill and real calm to manage safely. You recognize the trouble early through the careful attention you have trained yourself to bring to every labor, and you do not panic, though your own heart beats harder than it shows on your calm outward face. You have learned of such cases before through the careful teaching of your own long-departed mentor, who once described to you, patiently and in exactly the kind of detail that now proves its worth, precisely how such a birth must be guided rather than forced, how patience and careful, gentle positioning of your own hands can very often turn what seems a dangerous complication into a hard but survivable birth for both mother and child. You work slowly through the difficult hours that follow, guiding rather than pulling, waiting for the body's own natural rhythm to align with your careful adjustments, rather than fighting against it, speaking low and steady to the frightened mother throughout, telling her honestly that this will be harder than most births, but that you have seen it managed safely before, and expect, with her strength and your careful hands together, to manage it safely again now. It is, without question, one of the hardest single hours your whole career has asked of you, every part of your trained attention focused entirely on the careful, patient work in front of you, and when the child finally arrives, difficult but whole and breathing and crying loudly into the world, you feel a relief so large it nearly buckles your own tired knees. Mother and child both recover fully, and the story of that hard, safely managed birth travels through the parish in the particular way that such stories do, deepening still further the village's trust in your steady hands, though you yourself remember it less as a triumph than as a stark reminder of how much responsibility rests on a single pair of trained hands in a place with no one else to call upon. It is exactly this kind of case, rare and demanding, and ultimately successful only through years of accumulated patient learning, that shows most clearly why the slow, careful teaching passed from healer to healer across generations matters so very much. For without your own mentor's patient instruction years before, that difficult night might well have ended very differently indeed. You are not, in truth, quite as alone in this wide, scattered world as the long stretches of solitary walking sometimes make you feel. And it is worth remembering, before we finally close this long day, the quiet fellowship that exists between healers like yourself scattered across the wider countryside, each tending her own parish alone, and yet all of you, in some loose, informal way, part of the same old craft, passed hand to hand across the whole land. Perhaps twice a year, you make the longer walk to visit an older healer in a village 2 days distant, a woman who trained a full generation before you, and whose knowledge, deepened by decades more practice than your own, has more than once saved you from a mistake you might otherwise have made alone. These visits carry a particular warmth that your daily village work, however satisfying, rarely offers in quite the same measure, for here, at last, is someone who understands exactly the weight your work carries, the endless knocks at odd hours, the particular loneliness of holding so much responsibility with no one to share the harder decisions with, the quiet grief of the cases that do not end well. You sit together over tea long into the evening, comparing notes on remedies and cases, she offering you what her longer experience has taught her. You offering her, in turn, whatever fresher observations your own more recent practice has yielded. Two women bound not by blood, but by the same old, patient craft, each stronger for having the other to lean upon even across the distance that ordinarily separates you. You have learned things from her across these visits that no book could have taught you. A subtler way of managing a difficult birth, a remedy for a stubborn skin trouble that your own Hedge does not readily provide. And you have offered her, in turn, your own hard-won observations from cases she has not yet encountered in her own longer career. This quiet exchange, informal and unrecorded anywhere, but in your own two memories, is nonetheless a real and vital part of how this whole scattered craft continues to deepen and improve across the generations, each healer adding her own small portion of hard-won wisdom to a tradition far larger than any single practitioner could build alone, passed forward not through any formal institution, but through exactly this kind of patient, personal friendship between women who understand, better than almost anyone else could, precisely what the other's daily life actually demands. If you allow yourself, on a quiet evening like this one, to add up the whole long tally of years you have given to this work, the sum grows large enough to startle you a little. Decades now of knocks answered at every hour, hundreds upon hundreds of visits, more births attended than you could easily count, more fevers broken, more wounds cleaned and closed, more frightened households steadied through their worst nights than any single memory could hope to properly hold. You do not keep any written record of this. For such toiling was never truly the point of the work, but the accumulated weight of it settles into you all the same, a quiet, private sense of a whole life meaningfully spent, one patient visit at a time, in service to a place and a people who needed exactly what you had to give. You think, too, of all the small threads this single life has woven together without you ever quite planning it that way. The garden tended season after season. The hedge walked so many times you could trace its whole length blindfolded. The shelf of remedies built jar by careful jar across decades of gathering and drying. The trust earned one honest visit at a time, until it became simply the settled, unremarkable fact of your whole existence here. None of it happened quickly. All of it happened slowly, the way anything truly lasting happens, patient season folding into patient season, until an entire life had quietly assembled itself around the simple, steady work of caring for whoever knocked upon your door. There comes, eventually, a winter when it is you rather than any villager who falls seriously ill. A heavy chest cold that settles deep and will not lift the way your own remedies have always lifted it from every other body you have tended across the years. And it is worth telling this part of the story too, gently, for it shows something you had perhaps half forgotten across so many years, spent always giving care rather than receiving it. You try, at first, to tend yourself the way you would tend anyone else. The thyme and elderberry, the honey stirred into warm water, but your own body, weakened by age and by the particular hard winter that has settled outside your door, does not respond as readily as a younger patient's body might, and the cough deepens rather than easing, and a fever rises that leaves you, for the first time in longer than you can easily remember, genuinely too weak to rise from your own bed. It is the young woman you trained who finds you like this, arriving one morning to help sort a delivery of dried herbs, and instead finding her old teacher flushed and struggling for breath. And you watch, from the strange, humbling vantage of a patient rather than a healer, as she takes charge with a calm competence that fills you, even through your own fever, with a fierce and grateful pride. She does exactly what you taught her to do, exactly what she has watched you do at 100 other bedsides across her years of training, brewing the fever tea, sponging your brow, sitting with you through the worst of the coughing fits, and you understand, lying there weak and dependent in a way you have not been in decades, precisely how much comfort your own steady presence has given to every frightened patient you have ever tended, for you feel that same comfort now, powerfully, in her steady hands. The village, too, responds to your illness in a way that moves you more than you quite expect. Word travels quickly that the healer herself has fallen ill, and baskets begin arriving at your door within a single day, not the usual scattered payment for services rendered, but simply gifts, freely given, from households who have nothing specific to repay you for at this particular moment, but who cannot bear the thought of their healer going without care in her own hour of need. Broth is left warm at your door by neighbors who slip away before you can properly thank them. Children who have grown up under your careful tending leave small drawings and pressed flowers on your windowsill, their own small offerings of comfort. You understand, receiving all of this, something you had perhaps known only abstractly before, that the trust and care you have poured into this village across so many decades was never a one-way current, however Much it may have felt that way through all your years of steady giving, but a deep, patient reservoir that the whole village has been quietly filling in return the entire time, ready now to be drawn upon in exactly this kind of need. You recover slowly. Over several weeks, the young woman managing nearly the whole of the parish's needs alone through that stretch, proving to herself and to the whole watching village, in exactly the trial by fire you had perhaps always known would eventually come, that she is fully ready to carry this work forward whenever the day finally comes that you cannot. And when you are finally strong enough to sit again by your own low fire, wrapped warm against the last of the winter's cold, you find yourself thinking, with a clarity that only illness and dependency seem to bring, about the whole reciprocal nature of a life spent in service like this one. How thoroughly and how generously it is repaid, in the end, not in any single grand gesture, but in exactly the same slow, patient currency you yourself have always given, care returned quietly, one small offering at a time, for as long as it is needed. There is one more small moment from those years worth telling too, a quieter one, that shows how completely the young woman had grown into the work she was trained for. Called alone to a difficult case some months after your illness, a farmer's young son, badly scalded by a kettle knocked from the fire, she manages the whole case entirely on her own, from the first careful cleaning of the burn to the honey dressing, to the patient days of watching afterward that such an injury demands, exactly as you once managed your own first hard cases alone. You hear of it only afterward, second-hand, from the grateful father himself, who tells you, with a warmth that carries no comparison intended, how calm and sure the young healer's hands had been. You feel, hearing this, none of the small pang of displacement a lesser teacher might feel at hearing her student praised in her place, only a full, uncomplicated gladness, the particular gladness of watching something you built with your own patient years of teaching stand now, fully capable, entirely on its own. On another quiet evening, much like this one, you find yourself simply sitting with the names of the whole parish drifting slowly through your mind, the way an old woman might finger through a basket of keepsakes without any particular purpose beyond the gentle pleasure of remembering. And it seems worth sharing a little of that slow remembering here with you now, for there is a particular calm in simply naming a life's worth of quiet faces, one after another. Before we let this whole long evening finally close, there is the miller's family, whose children you have tended through every ordinary childhood fever and scrape for as long as you can remember. The youngest of them now nearly grown and beginning, in small ways, to help his father with the heavier work of the wheel. There is the widow at the lane's far end, whose aching joints you visit every autumn as reliably as the season itself turns, bringing the same warming salve, sitting a while for the conversation as much as for the tending. For you have learned that loneliness itself is its own kind of ailment and deserves its own kind of care. There is the family at the largest farm, whose grown son's broken leg you set all those years ago, and whose own children now run to greet you eagerly whenever you pass, having grown up hearing the story of their father's leg told and retold at the fireside, until it has become something close to a small piece of the household's own private history. There is the old man with his faithful winter cough, gone now these several years, whose passing you sat through with the same steady presence you had brought to every one of his difficult winters, and whose absence you still feel faintly every year on the first truly cold night of the season, when no one comes anymore to fetch you for his particular trouble. There is the young mother whose difficult breech birth tested every part of your skill, her child, now a sturdy young girl who has taken, more than once, to following the trained apprentice around the garden with exactly the same curious fascination you once inspired in a whole generation of the parish's children. There is the stranger passing through so many years ago now, whose name you never even properly learned, carried only briefly through your life, and then gone again down the long road toward the town beyond the wood. A small reminder that your care, though it lives mostly among familiar faces, was never truly bounded by familiarity alone. There is the priest, older now himself, with whom you have shared so many of this parish's hardest hours, prayer and herb, offered together at more bedsides than either of you could easily count. A quiet partnership built across decades of trusting each other's different but complementary comfort. There is the family at the Manor, whose fevers and complaints you have tended alongside every cottage's fevers and complaints, the same careful attention given whichever door you happen to be standing behind. There is the young cleric who once tested your knowledge with his polite, learned skepticism, long since continued on his own distant road, carrying with him, you like to imagine, a slightly changed and humbled understanding of what a village healer's untutored craft could actually accomplish. And there is, above all of them, the young woman herself, once a curious child sitting quietly by your fire asking careful questions, now the steady, capable healer this whole parish increasingly turns to first. Her own hands as sure now as yours once were, her own patience and skill built the very same slow way yours were built through years of faithful, unglamorous practice. You think of her most of all on evenings like this one, for she represents, more than any single case or any single cure, the truest measure of what this whole long life has actually accomplished, not merely the individual fevers broken or births attended, though there have been so very many of those, but the unbroken chain itself, reaching backward through your own teacher and her teacher before that, and reaching forward now, through her own steady hands, into a future none of you will ever fully see, but all of you have helped, each in your own patient turn, to keep faithfully unbroken. This, perhaps, is the deepest and quietest truth this whole long life has taught you, that no single healer, however skilled or however faithful, ever truly works alone. However solitary those long dark walks between scattered cottages sometimes felt across the years, you have always been held, without quite realizing how completely, within a much larger, much older weave of care, stretching backward through generations of healers who learned and taught and passed their hard-won knowledge patiently forward, and stretching outward, too, through the whole quiet reciprocity of a village that gives back, in its own steady way, every bit as much as it receives. You were never simply the one giving care to a place that needed it. You were, all along, one small but essential thread within a far larger fabric of care that this whole small corner of the world had been patiently weaving long before you arrived, and will, you trust, continue weaving long after you are gone. Let me tell you, too, before we close, a little of how a truly ordinary day unfolds when nothing dramatic happens at all, for it would be easy, hearing only the harder cases we have walked through tonight, to imagine your whole life as one long procession of fevers and fractures and difficult births. Most days are gentler than that, and it is worth sitting for a while in the plain, unremarkable texture of one such ordinary day, for this quieter rhythm, more than any single dramatic case, is the true daily shape of the life you have built here. You rise on such a day, not to any urgent knock, but simply with the light, the way most of the village rises. And you spend the early hours tending your own small household first, feeding the hens, milking the goat, setting bread to rise by the fire, the same plain domestic tasks that fill every cottage in the parish, regardless of who lives within it. There is a comfort in this ordinary domestic rhythm that your more dramatic calls rarely allow you to fully enjoy. The simple pleasure of a quiet morning, with no one yet needing anything beyond what your own hands can easily provide. The morning proper brings its usual gentle trickle of small, unremarkable visits. An old woman stopping by simply to ask whether a particular ache in her hip means anything serious, and you reassure her, after a brief, careful examination, that it is nothing more than the ordinary wear of long years and hard work, sending her home with a small salve and the kind of unhurried conversation that costs you nothing but time and matters to her more than she would ever say outright. A young mother brings her infant simply to be weighed and checked, no complaint at all beyond the ordinary anxious watchfulness that every new mother carries, and you spend a few gentle minutes reassuring her that the child is thriving exactly as it should. The afternoon finds you back in your garden, tending what always wants tending, weeding a bed grown a little wild, checking the drying racks in the still room, restocking a jar that has run low. A neighbor passes by and stops to chat over the low fence, trading a little gossip alongside a small gift of fresh eggs. No illness involved at all, simply the easy, comfortable friendship of two people who have known each other their whole lives. You take a slow walk out to the hedge in the day's softer evening light, gathering whatever the season currently offers, enjoying, as you so often do on these gentler days, the simple physical pleasure of walking a familiar path through green, growing things under an open sky. Evening brings supper, simple and plain, shared sometimes with the young woman you trained, who has taken, in recent years, to eating with you more often than not. The two of you talking over the day's small events, planning ahead for whatever the coming week's needs might be, sharing the particular easy companionship that grows between two people who have spent years working closely at the same demanding, meaningful trade. And then, if the night stays quiet, as most nights eventually do despite how often this story has focused on the harder ones, you settle by your own low fire for an hour or two before sleep finally claims you, mending, reading, simply resting, grateful, in these plain ordinary hours, for a day that asked nothing extraordinary of you at all. It is important, I think, to have walked through a day like this one alongside all the harder days we have shared tonight, for a life measured only by its crises would seem a harsher, more exhausting thing than the life you have actually lived. Most of your days, in truth, look far more like this quiet, unremarkable one than like the dramatic nights of broken bones and difficult births that make for the more memorable telling. The steady, patient texture of ordinary care, offered day after day, season after season, to a village that has come to depend on your quiet, reliable presence, is the true foundation beneath every dramatic case we have followed tonight. And it is, in its own gentle way, every bit as important to the whole shape of this long, well-lived life. It is worth understanding, too, a little of how you first came to this work at all, for no one is born a healer, and the path that carried you here began, like so much else in this life, quietly, and without any dramatic announcement. You were a girl of perhaps 10 or 11, the story goes, when the healer who held this cottage before you, an aunt on your mother's side, noticed something in you that she did not see so readily in your sisters and cousins, a particular steadiness around illness and injury that most children your age did not possess, a willingness to sit calmly beside a suffering creature rather than flinch away from it. She began taking you with her on her rounds not long after, at first simply to carry her basket and fetch water, small tasks that let you watch closely without yet being trusted with anything more delicate. You remember, even now, decades later, the particular fascination you felt watching her work, the calm, unhurried way she moved through even the most frightening sick room, the plain confidence with which she named each plant and each preparation. And you remember, too, wanting, with the whole simple clarity of a child's wanting, to grow up able to offer that same steady calm to a frightened household. The years that followed asked more of you gradually, exactly the way you yourself have since asked more of your own apprentice gradually, small tasks growing slowly into larger ones, watching becoming doing, doing becoming, eventually the kind of confident, independent judgment that only years of patient practice can build. You made mistakes along the way, as every apprentice does, a poultice mixed slightly wrong, a dose measured a little too generously before you had properly learned the careful arithmetic such measuring demands, and your aunt corrected you each time with the same patient firmness you now bring to correcting your own trained successor, never harsh, always clear, always trusting that the lesson, properly given, would take root. There came a day, you remember it still with a peculiar mixture of pride and terror, when your aunt sent you alone to tend a minor case for the very first time, a child's scraped knee needing nothing more than a careful cleaning and a simple dressing, and though the case itself was small, the responsibility of handling it entirely without her steadying presence beside you felt enormous, and you walked home afterward filled with a fierce, quiet satisfaction that you still remember clearly even now, so many decades, and so many far harder cases later. Your aunt held this cottage for a good many years, after that first small solo case of yours, gradually trusting you with more and larger responsibilities as your own confidence and skill grew, until, in the natural, unhurried way such things happen in this life, the day finally came when age and failing strength made it clear that the work belonged properly to you now, and she stepped back, much as you yourself have more recently stepped back for your own trained successor, content to advise when asked, but no longer carrying the daily weight of the parish's needs on her own shoulders. She lived a good many years more after that, watching you grow fully into the work she had spent so long patiently teaching you, and her own passing, when it finally came, was gentle and unafraid, surrounded by a village she had served faithfully for the whole of her long life, tended in her own final days by the very hands she herself had trained. You think of her often, especially on evenings like this one, and you understand, more clearly now than you perhaps could have understood as a young apprentice still learning the trade, exactly what she gave you when she first noticed that particular steadiness in a girl of 10 or 11 and decided, patiently, to nurture it. She gave you not merely a trade, though the trade itself has sustained you through a whole long life, but a whole way of belonging to a place and a people, a way of understanding your own worth, not through wealth or rank but through steady, faithful service, freely given and, in its own quiet way, just as freely returned. It is this same gift, more than any single remedy or any single skill, that you have tried hardest to pass forward to your own trained successor, trusting that she, too, will one day pass it forward again to whichever curious child eventually shows that same particular steadiness that first caught your own aunt's careful attention so very long ago. There is one final case worth telling before we finally let this long day rest, small in itself, but carrying somehow the whole shape of everything we have walked through tonight folded into a single quiet afternoon. It is many years on now from that first cold knock before dawn, and a small child, no more than 5 or 6, comes running up your garden path one warm afternoon, not frightened, not carrying any urgent message, but simply curious, drawn by the scent of drying lavender carried on the breeze from your open door. She stands at the low wattle fence, peering in at the neat rows of herbs, and asks you, with the plain directness only a small child manages so easily, what all of it is for. You set down what you are doing and come to the fence yourself, crouching to her height, and you begin, patiently, the way you have begun this same gentle explanation for so many curious children across so many years, to name a few of the plants for her. This one for a sore throat, this one for a bee sting, this one that smells so sweet because it helps tired little minds rest easier at night. She listens with the whole rapt attention small children bring to exactly the things adults so often overlook, and she asks, before she finally runs off toward whatever else has caught her afternoon's attention, whether she might come back another day and learn more. You tell her, smiling, that she is welcome any time at all, and you watch her go, small and quick down the lane, and you feel, in that small, unremarkable exchange, the whole long thread of this craft stretching forward once again, the way it has stretched forward through every generation before yours, and will, you trust, continue stretching forward long after you yourself have finally set down your basket for the last time. This, in the end, is what a life like this one actually amounts to, not any single dramatic rescue, though there have been a few of those across the years, but this steady, patient, repeated offering of care, one visit at a time, one season at a time, one curious child at a time, until an entire small world has come to depend, quietly and completely, on the simple fact that someone is there, ready, whenever the knock finally comes. You could not have known, that very first cold morning so many years ago, opening your door to a frightened young father and his fevered daughter, that this single small act, repeated faithfully thousands of times across the decades since, would grow into an entire life so full and so deeply rooted in one small, particular place. But it has, and as the afternoon light softens, toward evening around your quiet garden, you find yourself, as you so often do now in these later years, simply grateful for every long hard step of the whole slow journey that carried you here. We have walked a very long way together tonight, through a whole life lived at a pace, and in a shape quite different from anything most of us know now, a life without guild seal or shop sign, without any of the conveniences that later ages would come to take entirely for granted, and yet a life rich in exactly the things that matter most in any age: purpose plainly seen and steadily fulfilled, trust patiently earned and faithfully kept, a whole community's quiet gratitude carried not in coin but in eggs and bread and mended fences, and the simple, settled fact of belonging completely to a place that needed you. It is time now, gently, to let this long imagined life rest, and to let your own thoughts drift back slowly to wherever you actually are tonight, warm and safe, and under your own roof, rather than any low-thatched cottage of centuries past. There is no more walking to do, no more knocks to answer, no more baskets to pack for whatever the dark hours might bring. The garden of this story has been walked. The hedge has given up its remedies. The village has settled, one household at a time, into its own long night's rest, and so, now, can you? Let the whole long, unhurried story we have shared tonight settle quietly into the back of your mind, the way a well-tended fire settles into embers, still warm, still glowing faintly, but no longer needing any tending at all. You do not need to remember any of the particular remedies we named, the yarrow or the willow bark, or the honey kept ready by the hearth. You do not need to hold on to any of the particular faces we imagined together: the frightened young father, the laboring mother, the old man with his faithful winter cough. Let them all drift gently away now, into the same soft, dim quiet that gathers at the edges of a room when a candle finally burns low. If your own eyes have grown heavy as we have walked this long road together, that is exactly as it should be, and you need not fight it. Let them close. Let your breathing settle into its own slow, even rhythm, the way the whole village's breathing settled, one household at a time, into the quiet of that long-ago night. There is nothing left tonight that asks anything of you. No knock is coming. No fever needs tending. No basket needs packing before the dawn. You may simply rest, as completely and as peacefully as you wish, for as long as you need. Thank you for spending these long, quiet hours with me tonight. This has been the Quiet Apothecary, and this has been the story of a life lived slowly and well, in service to a small, scattered village that no longer has a name anyone remembers, cared for by hands that gathered their medicine from a humble garden and a wild green hedge, and paid, more often than not, in nothing grander than eggs and bread and the quiet, steady gratitude of neighbors who trusted, every single night, that someone would answer the knock. Sleep well now. There is nothing more to walk through tonight. The lamp in that small imagined cottage has finally gone out. The garden lies dark and resting beneath a wide, quiet sky, and the whole long village sleeps sound. Every one of its scattered households, settled safely into the dark, watched over, as it always has been, by nothing more than one steady, patient pair of hands, and by whatever quiet trust has grown, over years, between neighbors who have learned to care for one another. Rest now, the way that whole village rests tonight. There is nothing left to do, and nowhere else you need to be, but here, warm and still, drifting gently down into sleep.